Under the dark, star-studded sky, the gates of Dungland's shelter creaked open, breaking the night silence. Inside, a weary man frowned, wondering who would come at such an hour. As he approached, he saw a cloaked woman standing before him. Without patience, he told her to leave, claiming the shelter was already full. But the woman's voice trembled as she pleaded for help, explaining she had nowhere else to go. Then she revealed a silver coin from her cloak, hoping it would change his mind. The man's eyes lingered on the glinting coin before he sighed and opened the gate wider, allowing her and the small child beside her to enter. The trio crossed into the dimly lit grounds, their shadows long beneath the full moon. He led them to a modest room, telling them that the shelter's rules and fees would be explained the next morning. With that, he turned to leave. The woman, Helen, bowed deeply and thanked him over and over. Inside the small room, Helen helped the boy sit on the simple bed. She placed a hand on his shoulder, telling him softly that things had been hard, but he should try to rest. She promised that the people he was waiting for would come soon. Comforted by her gentle words, the boy nodded and lay down to sleep. As moonlight poured through the window, Helen sat beside him, watching over his peaceful face. A sudden cough shook her body, blood staining her trembling hand. Gasping for breath, she whispered a final wish, that the boy might find happiness in his life. And then she went still. Moments later, the child stirred, calling softly to her. When she didn't respond, he reached out to wake her and froze. His small hand came away wet with blood. Panic spread through him as he screamed her name, his voice echoing through the quiet shelter. The commotion drew the shelter manager, who appeared with another woman irritated by the disturbance. Clicking his tongue, he muttered about the trouble Helen had caused by dying there. The woman beside him asked what would happen to the boy. After a moment's thought, the manager decided the child could be useful. His hair color was similar to Pauline's, one of the women working at the shelter. They could pretend to be mother and son to earn sympathy and money. As Pauline entered, the manager ordered her to take the boy with her starting that day. The child sat silently on the bed, still in shock. The manager left, grumbling that the shelter wasn't a charity and that they needed to make a profit somehow. Dungland Shelter, outwardly known as a royal charity for the poor, was in truth a place of exploitation. Children were treated as commodities, their lives bound to the greed of those who ran it. Pauline looked at the boy with quiet sadness. Sitting beside him, she introduced herself and said he would now live with her. She took his small hand and told him gently that no matter what, he had to survive. If he could endure the pain, happiness would one day find him again. With a silent nod, the boy, Rowan, took her hand and followed her out. From that day, Rowan's life became one of begging. He stayed close to Pauline, whom he came to call Mother Pauline. Though their bond had begun as an act, her kindness was real. She shielded him from cruelty, protected him from bullies and vagrants, and gave him a sense of safety he hadn't known since Helen's passing. With her by his side, loneliness never took hold. 5 years passed. Pauline sat on a park bench one evening as the sun began to set. A cheerful voice called her name. Rowan, now 8 years old, came running toward her with a smile. He proudly showed her the bucket of coins he had collected. She praised his effort, and he quickly reminded her to rest too. Then, hesitantly, he mentioned a rumor he'd heard, that she would be leaving soon. Pauline nodded. She had found work as a maid in a noble's household. Rowan smiled through his sadness, saying she would do well anywhere. Laughing softly, Pauline ruffled his hair, teasing him to worry less about her. She thanked him for the past 5 years, her voice warm but tinged with farewell. Memories flooded Rowan's heart. How she had cared for him when he was lost and broken. How she had stood between him and harm again and again. His eyes filled with tears. Everyone he had loved, his parents, Helen, and now even Mother Pauline, seemed to drift away. Seeing his trembling lips, Pauline held his face firmly in her hands and made him look at her. She told him that people are never truly alone as long as they carry love in their hearts. Even if those they care about leave, their warmth remains inside. She told him to remember that, to hold on to every bit of kindness and love he'd received, and he would never truly be alone. Whenever loneliness threatened to overwhelm him, Pauline had told Rowan to close his eyes, place a hand over his heart, and remember that she would always be there, in spirit if not in form. Now, standing alone beneath the cold morning light, Rowan reflected on her parting words. The woman who had once been his shield, his comfort, his only family was gone. He felt the weight of her absence pressing heavily on his chest, but her voice echoed in his mind, urging him to look inward, to open the eyes of his heart. So he did. As he focused on the quiet rhythm within his chest, a soft blue light began to glow from deep inside him. The world seemed to change. Even with his eyes closed, he could see every detail, every motion, every shimmer of life around him, as though the universe itself had opened to his gaze. His eyes flickered with that same ethereal blue light as realization struck. This was the power she'd spoken of, the awakening of his heart's eyes. In that moment, he could sense the warmth of the people he had lost. His mother, his father, Helen, and mother Pauline. They were all there, surrounding him like gentle whispers of light. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered a promise to never forget them, to live as they had taught him to. A year passed. The shelter remained as harsh as ever, its cold walls filled with the noise of weary children preparing for another day of labor. Rowan, now older and more composed, still wondered about Mother Pauline, where she was, whether she was safe, and if she ever thought of him. He had grown used to working alone, assigned to District 1, the shelter's most profitable area. His quiet nature and kind smile made him one of the best earners, earning him slightly better treatment from the managers. That morning, Blake, a tall, broad-shouldered boy who supervised District 1, gave him a friendly pat on the head. Blake had always looked out for Rowan, often saying he'd make sure no one messed with him. It was Blake who had unknowingly helped Rowan understand what he'd been seeing all along. Those glowing clusters of light that dance around people were mana. Rowan had learned to see not just the physical form of people, but their energy, the very essence of life flowing through them. To him, the world was painted in living color, swirling currents of light and emotion intertwined with every movement and breath. Even so, this gift came with a cost. Sometimes the dual layers of existence made his vision blur, his mind spin with dizziness. Blake often warned him to stay away from mana cultivation, insisting it was dangerous for the untrained. Rowan only smiled and nodded, never revealing that he already understood it better than most. When he spoke to strangers, while begging, his gentle observations, "Your heart is beautiful too, teacher," often left people startled and touched, their generosity doubling in response. To the shelter, he was simply a lucky, sweet-faced boy. But Rowan knew better. His sight revealed the true colors of people's souls. That morning, as he sat by the roadside, coins clinking into his small metal container, Blake crouched beside him. He laughed in amazement at the pile of coins Rowan had already gathered. Rowan smiled, saying softly that people were kind today. Blake's face grew serious, warning him that not everyone liked seeing others do well. He told Rowan to be cautious, to report anything strange immediately. Rowan promised he would. But as Blake walked away, Rowan decided to keep his newest discovery to himself. For several days, he had sensed something unusual, people whose mana burned brighter than anyone else's. Two figures in particular had been watching him, their auras glowing in vivid orange light. Each time he spotted them, they disappeared with impossible speed, leaping over rooftops as if gravity itself didn't apply to them. He hadn't told anyone, but today, something was different. As Rowan stood to leave, the clatter of footsteps echoed behind him, too close, too deliberate. His heart pounded as his senses sharpened. Looking up, his glowing sight caught the unmistakable hue of bright orange mana on a nearby rooftop. The same figures were there. They weren't just watching him anymore. They were following him. Panic surged through him as he turned into a narrow alley lined with old crates and broken boxes. A dead end. Through his mana vision, he saw one figure closing in behind him, and another approaching fast from the side. His only thought was to reach the safety of the shelter before they could catch him. And with that, Rowan broke into a desperate sprint, the sound of pursuit echoing through the alleyway as the hunters closed in. Rowan's lungs burned as he ran through the twisting alleys, heart hammering against his chest. The sound of his own footsteps echoed off the cold stone walls, but behind him, the rhythm of pursuit never faltered. His pursuers moved like shadows, relentless and swift. Panic clawed at him. No matter how fast he ran, he could feel them closing in. Just when despair began to take hold, a familiar voice tore through the chaos. "Rowan!" He turned and he saw Blake racing toward him, his figure a blur of speed and strength. Relief flooded Rowan's trembling body. "Brother Blake!" he cried out. Without missing a beat, Blake leapt upward with astonishing force, catching Rowan midair in one smooth motion. "Hold on tight," he ordered. And then, with effortless grace, they soared, Blake's powerful strides launching them from rooftop to rooftop, the city sprawling beneath their feet. Rowan clung to him, wide-eyed. Even as danger loomed behind them, Blake found time to shout over the rushing wind, "Don't drop the money jar. No coins, no dinner. Got it?" But Rowan didn't answer. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with awe. He was seeing something. Blake noticed his dazed expression, but didn't press further until they landed near the shelter gates. Setting Rowan down gently, he gave quick instructions. "Go inside. There's been some trouble and all the kids are being called back. Just rest and wait for me, okay?" Rowan only stared blankly. Blake flicked his forehead with a half smile. "Hey, you listening? You're safe now. They won't come here. Pull yourself together, kid." Rowan managed a small nod. "Yes, take care." As Blake ran off to handle the situation, Rowan stood frozen before the shelter doors, his heart still pounding. His mind replayed the scene. The way Blake's movements seemed to ripple with power, the air around him alive with invisible energy. He had seen it clearly through his awakened sight, the flow of mana coursing through Blake's limbs, surging and bursting outward with every leap. It was breathtaking. It was something he had to understand. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, trying to mimic what he had witnessed. Slowly, he began guiding the energy around him inward. Through his breath, through his body. He focused on the sensation of it moving beneath his skin, circulating like a current of light. Then suddenly, something clicked. His body felt lighter, his senses sharper. He smiled faintly. He understood mana. Before he could test further, voices filled the corridor. Children murmured anxiously, wondering why they'd been called back so suddenly. A strict order for silence cut through the noise as the dorm master entered. He assured them there was no danger, just a routine inspection. Then his gaze landed squarely on Rowan. "Rowan," he said sharply. "Yes, dorm master? Pack your things. You're being transferred." Confused but obedient, Rowan gathered his few belongings into a small sack and followed the man out. They walked until they reached a large iron gate where another, higher-ranking man awaited. The two adults began to speak quietly, just out of Rowan's earshot. Curiosity got the better of him. Remembering what he had just learned, Rowan drew in a slow breath and focused mana toward his ears, enhancing his hearing. The world sharpened. Their voices came through clearly. "You're moving a child from the begging dorm to the main building?" the senior man questioned. "The director has taken an interest in him," the dorm master replied. "The boy's appearance draws sympathy, makes him valuable, especially after what happened in District 1 today. We can't risk another incident with the Union or those two runners." Union? Runners? Rowan's heart skipped. Could they mean the same people who had chased him earlier? His thoughts were interrupted when the senior man suddenly turned to him. "Hey, you there?" Rowan jumped. Yes, sir." "Come with me." He followed the man up a wide, spiraling staircase until they reached a heavy wooden door. The man knocked twice. "Amy," he called before opening it. Inside, a woman with short, dark hair looked up from her desk. Her sharp eyes softened slightly as she saw the small boy standing timidly in the doorway. The man gestured toward her. "This is Amy. From today onward," he said firmly, "she's the one in charge of you." Amy was introduced with a polite formality, her presence calm but commanding. The senior man beside her explained that Rowan came from the dormitory wing, and that, unfortunately, he still couldn't read. He asked Amy to keep that in mind, then quietly excused himself, leaving Rowan standing awkwardly before her. Amy's sharp gaze lingered on him, and Rowan felt a nervous sweat forming. She asked how old he was. "I'll be 10 soon," he answered softly. Amy nodded, then asked if it was true he couldn't read. Rowan, slightly embarrassed, admitted he had never learned. She sighed, saying it was understandable for a child from the dormitory wing. But then, with a faint smile, she told him she would begin teaching him to read starting tomorrow. He was to call her teacher, though in private, she said he could call her big sister. She tilted her head, studying him with mild curiosity. "You have a surprisingly refined face for someone from the dormitory wing." Rowan blinked in confusion and simply replied, "Yes." When he asked why he was being taught to read, Amy looked at him in disbelief. "You really don't know what reading sessions are?" she murmured, half to herself. Shaking her head, she explained that reading sessions were gatherings where people read books aloud. Sometimes authors themselves, sometimes nobles who hosted them for entertainment. Even the shelter held sponsor readings for benefactors. And if a child was lucky, they might be chosen for something called a special reading. Rowan's curiosity deepened. "What's a special reading?" he asked. Amy told him that children who read well often got adopted, and a special reading was when a child chosen for adoption read privately before their sponsor. She smiled faintly. "But that's far off for you, isn't it? You don't even know your letters yet." Rowan nodded quietly. Amy studied him again. Despite his timid background, there wasn't a hint of fear in his eyes. Her expression softened. She gently patted his head and said, "Come with me." She led him to a room where several other children were gathered. "Everyone, this is Rowan from the dormitory wing," she announced. "Get along well and don't cause trouble." She pointed to an empty corner. "That spot's yours." Then with one last reminder to stay quiet, she left. Rowan looked around the room in awe. For the first time in his life, he had his own small closet. A simple thing, but to him it felt like a luxury. A boy named Theo turned to him, wide-eyed. "You really came from the dormitory wing?" Rowan nodded. Theo grinned, saying it was the first time someone from there had joined their group. He introduced the others, Noah, Hayden, and Lily, and assured Rowan that they weren't like the rough kids from the dormitories. "Good news," Theo added with a smile. "You won't have to go begging anymore. We just take care of the library and help guests. Our group manages the books here." That one word, books, echoed in Rowan's mind. Later that night, as he lay in his new bed, he thought about Mother Pauline's words. She once told him that books held all the world's knowledge, that someone with his curiosity would one day fall in love with them. Now, surrounded by shelves of stories, Rowan smiled faintly. His wish had come true. The moonlight streamed through the window, soft and silver, wrapping the room in a peaceful glow. For a moment, It felt like the happy ending of a fairy tale. Time passed. Rowan's reading improved quickly. One day, Amy called his name, asking him to bring the book he'd read that day. She flipped through it quietly, her face unreadable. Rowan waited nervously. Then, after a moment, she smiled. "You've done well. You can move on from children's stories to District 2 novels now." Relief washed over him. He thanked her, but couldn't help wondering what had caused her to pause earlier. Still, the thought of reading books from District 2, the adult section, filled him with excitement. Amy allowed him to stay a little longer. Rowan eagerly roamed the shelves, scanning one title after another. So many stories, so many worlds waiting for him. Then a massive set of volumes caught his attention. Their title read, "The Birth of the Grafton Kingdom and the Union." He opened one, fascinated by the maps and detailed histories inside. The book told of how the world had been unified, one kingdom and 6 principalities after a long war. To maintain peace, the king had formed an organization called the Union, which had governed for over 2 centuries. Rowan wondered if that meant they were all noble and good. But then, confusion crept in. If the Union was so righteous, why had Blake run from them? And why did the shelter seem to keep its distance? Something didn't add up. As he closed the book, a quiet question lingered in his mind. One that refused to fade. What were they hiding? The next morning, Rowan dusted the shelves, mana humming softly within him. His movements were steady, controlled. He had learned to let mana flow even while working, not just in still meditation. It wasn't perfect yet, but every breath, every motion brought him closer to mastery. And as sunlight filtered through the windows, Rowan felt it again, that same quiet determination that had led him here. The will to learn, the hunger to know, and the feeling that this was only the beginning. He had been training hard, carefully circulating mana through his body while he worked. But no matter how much effort he put in, the density of it refused to grow. It stayed thin and faint, just out of reach. Rowan sighed, but didn't let frustration take over. He decided to keep going, slowly, step by step. A moment later, the sound of a bell echoed across the room. The call to assemble. Amy entered, followed by a tall woman with fiery red hair, the deputy director. Her sharp eyes scanned the gathered children, her presence instantly silencing every whisper. She moved her gaze from one face to another, murmuring thoughtfully as if deciding who was worthy. Then she called out the names: Theo, Lily, Noah, and Rowan. Rowan blinked, surprised. His name? The red-haired woman explained that, while he wouldn't participate in the recital just yet, he'd only finished his first storybook after all, his presence would elevate the look of the group. For today, he would simply observe and learn. Rowan bowed politely, thanking her for the opportunity. She nodded briskly, and Amy clapped her hands. "All right, you heard her. Get changed and meet in the reception hall." A few of the boys who weren't chosen muttered under their breath. One of them grumbled about how unfair it was that Rowan got picked despite being new. Rowan pretended not to notice. When he changed into his neat new clothes, something inside him shifted. The mirror reflected not the ragged boy from the dormitory wing, but someone different. Someone who almost looked like he belonged there. Theo ran up, eyes wide. "Wow, you look amazing." Rowan smiled shyly, thanking him and returning the compliment before Amy led him to his seat in the grand hall. The reception hall was elegant, almost blinding in its polish. A long table stretched across the center, perfectly set for guests and children alike. Then came the knock on the door. Amy straightened up. Everyone, posture. Several finely dressed ladies entered, their perfume sweet and expensive. But then one of them gasped softly. "Oh my, you are..." Rowan looked up. It was her, the kind lady who had once given him money when he was begging in the cold streets. He remembered her smile, her gentle eyes, and how she had laughed when Ted told her she had a beautiful heart. "Rowan," she exclaimed warmly, "I'm so glad to see you again. How have you been?" The deputy director turned, surprised. "Lady Caroline, you know this boy." Lady Caroline nodded. "I met him at the Bree Crossroads last winter." Rowan bowed politely, offering a soft smile. She beamed at him, saying he looked even lovelier than before. The deputy director quickly added that, thanks to the shelter, Rowan had learned to read and write. Delighted, Lady Caroline clapped her hands. Then perhaps he could do today's reading. The deputy director hesitated. "Ah, he was only supposed to observe? Oh, what a shame." Lady Caroline sighed. "I truly wanted to hear him read." The room went quiet. Then the deputy director smiled faintly. Perhaps he could read the final chapter as a small trial. Lady Caroline's face lit up. Splendid idea. As Rowan stepped forward, a strange calm filled him. He hadn't rehearsed the lines, yet somehow they were already etched into his mind, flowing back to him as if whispered by the book itself. His chest tightened with a sudden, unexplainable emotion. And before he could stop himself, he looked right at Lady Caroline and said, softly but clearly, "I like you." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. then erupted in quiet gasps and gentle laughter. The lady smiled, utterly charmed. Rowan began to read. His voice carried the gentle hum of mana as the words took shape. The story unfolded. Duke Roger's quiet confession to Barry, her trembling attempt to look away. But as Rowan read, something strange began to happen. He could hear everything, every tiny breath, every heartbeat, every sigh that rippled through the room. His mana sharpened his senses until the world itself seemed to slow. It was overwhelming, yet beautiful. When he finished, Lady Caroline's eyes glistened. That was breathtaking, she whispered. Rowan bowed deeply. It's all thanks to Deputy Director Jean Boo's guidance, he said with grace. Lady Caroline clasped her hands. Then, may I hear you read again tomorrow? Rowan smiled gently. I'll be even more prepared. Her delighted laughter echoed in the hall. Later that day, while shelving books in the library, Rowan reflected on what had happened. He realized that controlling mana wasn't just about breathing or focus, it was about understanding his own body's flow. He recalled a book titled Principles of Phenomena, Movement in the Human Body, and wondered if another book might deepen his understanding. He reached for one called The Meaning of... A sudden voice cut in from behind. The Meaning of the Castle, someone finished. Startled, Rowan turned. But of course, he already knew who it was. He had sensed Blake's presence the moment he entered. Blake leaned casually against a shelf, smirking. It's that age, huh? Getting interested in big things already? He chuckled. Heard you nailed it at the sponsor reading. Too bad I missed it. Thought I'd at least come see the star in person. Rowan tilted his head. You were on duty? Something like that, Blake said with a shrug. But there was a heaviness in his tone. Rowan noticed it immediately. Did something happen? Blake sighed. Those punks who used to chase you, they're at it again. I'll handle them with the managers. Rowan smiled, confidence flickering in his young eyes. If you're getting involved, they don't stand a chance. Blake laughed, the tension easing. You've got quite the mouth now. He reached forward and pinched Rowan's cheeks with mock annoyance. Rowan winced playfully but didn't pull away. Somewhere in his thoughts, a line from an earlier book surfaced about how certain villains were kind to the people they liked. He wondered silently if that applied to Blake too. After a moment, Rowan chuckled. It's okay. There'll be more readings anyway. Blake released his cheeks, tapping the red book in Rowan's hand. Save that one for when you're not too tired. Don't burn all your energy at once. And with a final grin, he walked off, leaving Rowan staring down at the book, its crimson cover glowing faintly under the library light, like it was waiting for him to open it. Rowan chuckled to himself at a passing remark before Blake finally said his goodbyes and left. Left alone, Rowan began to wonder about Blake's connection to the Union. What kind of battle would it be if people who had truly mastered mana fought each other? Could he ever stand against someone like that? The thought lingered in his mind as he closed his eyes, drawing mana into his body and channeling it into the red book he was holding. A sudden crack echoed through the room, the book split clean in two. Rowan sighed in frustration, staring at the ruined cover. It felt like a waste. Before he could dwell on it, a knock came at the door, summoning him to Deputy Director Jean Boo's office. Inside, Jean looked exhausted, explaining that their benefactors had made an unusual demand. Several ladies wanted Rowan to be the star of the next event reading alone, without any other voices to distract from his charm. She seemed overwhelmed, yet determined to make it happen. When she asked if Rowan could handle a solo performance, he agreed without hesitation, easing her worry. Later, Jean gathered the children and announced a special reading. To everyone's surprise, Theo was chosen instead. Rowan congratulated him warmly, though he had half expected to be selected himself. Theo, smiling brightly, told Rowan that with his talent, he was sure to find a good home soon. After Theo left, life at the shelter grew busier. Rowan's days were packed with readings, and his name had started to spread among patrons. Amy informed him of another full day ahead reading scheduled for both morning and afternoon. Rowan thanked her, but admitted how draining the sessions had become. He asked if he could take short breaks outside, and Amy allowed it, warning him not to go beyond the backyard. Once outside, Rowan returned to his mana training. He focused on the internal flow of energy, trying to strengthen his control. He could feel progress, but he also realized how difficult it was to maintain concentration. Maybe his body itself was the limit. Still, he stayed patient, determined to overcome the weaknesses he had observed in others. He remembered how Blake had been exhausted after carrying him, and how even the Union members seemed to run out of strength quickly. It made him wonder if stored mana had its own limits or if external mana could be used instead. Focusing on a leaf, he channeled his energy carefully. To his surprise, the leaf floated upward, confirming his theory. Time passed, and another special reading was announced, this time for Lily. The children congratulated her, and Lily approached Rowan nervously. She started to say something, blushing and stammering, but before she could finish, other kids whispered that the director would never let Rowan go, calling him their golden goose. Distracted, Rowan missed Lily's words, and when he asked her to repeat, she quickly brushed it off and left with her friends, her cheeks still red. Later, Rowan thought about what it would be like to leave. He imagined a new home, more books to study, and perhaps answers about mana accumulation. The next day, while practicing in the backyard, he was now able to move pencils effortlessly with his mana. Then a sound caught his attention, a faint thud. He turned and saw Agar, the dormitory supervisor, collapsing by the wall. Rowan rushed over, sensing the man's mana flickering weakly. Another man appeared and helped Agar to his feet, muttering angrily about the Union. The word struck Rowan, filling him with unease. The man told him curtly to forget what he'd seen and go back inside. Rowan obeyed quietly. Not long after, Amy announced that the afternoon sponsored reading was suddenly cancelled. All the sponsors had been sent away and the children were told to return to their dorms immediately. Confusion filled the air. Such a thing had never happened before. Amy approached Rowan personally, her tone serious. She placed her hands on his shoulders and told him to get ready. He had a special reading to attend. Rowan adjusted his tie, unsettled by the sudden change. Amy's expression was more somber than ever. The recent events, Agar's collapse, the talk of the Union, the cancelled readings all swirled in his mind. Something was off. Amy turned and instructed him to follow. As they walked, Rowan asked if Lady Caroline was the one who had requested him. Amy paused, then quietly said, "It was someone else." Her voice carried a weight that made him uneasy. She didn't explain further. The path they took led them away from the main building, deeper into the woods, until they stopped before an unfamiliar, ominous structure. A worn sign read, "Shelter Annex." A wave of dark mana rippled through the air as Rowan stepped closer to the building. The pressure was suffocating, heavy enough to make his skin crawl. A man, likely the director, appeared at the entrance with a strange smile. He greeted Rowan and Amy hurriedly, insisting they come inside. The door closed behind them with a slow, echoing creak, sealing out all light. The entire building was windowless, the air thick with tension. Rowan's senses sharpened as he caught fragments of a hushed conversation nearby. The deputy director and the director whispering urgently. They spoke of salvaging what they could, of escaping before something arrived, and of a spell that had to be completed. Soon, the director turned to Rowan, pointing toward a single ornate chair. He ordered him to sit and read from the book placed there, saying it was part of the spell's condition. Rowan sat down, the heavy book resting in his lap. His instinct screamed at him that something was wrong. The room was dim, cold, and at its center lay a circular pit, pulsing with a strange purple glow. From it, Rowan felt the densest concentration of mana he had ever encountered. When the director commanded him to begin, Rowan started reading aloud. His voice filled the still air, echoing through the shadows. As he read, he felt the mana in the pit stir, as if something vast and unseen had awakened. It wasn't just mana, it was alive. It listened. With every word, Rowan felt emotions not his own washing over him. Joy, sorrow, anger, loneliness, regret, all at once. Then the realization struck. His own mana was being drained, pulled into the pit. He gritted his teeth and focused. He couldn't allow it to take everything. If this shelter really was being hunted, he needed his strength to survive. Drawing on every ounce of willpower, he tried absorbing the ambient mana around him, pulling it inward to stabilize his flow. The air around him began to swirl. Streams of raw energy gathered, wrapping around his body in a visible current. Against all odds, he gained control. He had managed to bend the mana flow to his will. The room remained quiet except for his voice. No new presences had entered, meaning the Union hadn't arrived yet. He had to stall, keep reading, keep the ritual alive until help came. In the shadows, the deputy director grew uneasy, whispering to the director that Rowan had been reading for far too long. The director's tone grew sharp. He muttered that the fruit should have ripened by now. Something wasn't going as planned. Moments later, the director and his deputy moved toward the back, fidgeting with a hidden mechanism behind a statue. A click echoed, followed by curses and hurried footsteps. Rowan sensed motion below. Then came a sickening thud. Someone had been struck. When he looked up, he saw the supervisor, Agar, lying on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. The director's voice rose in anger as he accused Agar of betrayal. The air erupted with chaos as the director and deputy fled down a spiral staircase, chased by writhing tendrils of dark energy. Rowan followed quietly, descending into the shadowed basement. What he found below froze his blood. A grotesque, tree-like sculpture stood in the center of the chamber, its trunk formed of countless human bodies twisted together, faces frozen in agony. At its core was a single figure, pierced through the chest by a sword. Rowan's breath caught as recognition set in. It was Pauline, his mother. Before he could react, the director appeared behind him, shouting accusations and grabbing his arm. Blake's voice echoed across the room, cutting through the noise. He confronted the director, accusing him of murdering the other leaders. The director only laughed, calling it a game. Blake raised a shriveled fruit, saying he had followed them when they vanished and found this. this monstrous creation. Pressed to the edge, the director admitted everything. Rowan had been brought here as fuel, to create another fruit before the pursuers arrived. The ritual wasn't about knowledge or protection, it was sacrifice. Blake's fury ignited. He drew his sword and struck toward Pauline's figure. In that moment, Rowan remembered a question he'd once asked Blake. Why didn't he carry a sword? Blake's cryptic reply echoed back. He needed it for something else. And now he understood. The sword impaling Pauline was Blake's. Red energy flared around Blake's hand as the director yanked Rowan forward, covering his eyes. A sudden motion, a flash of pain, and Blake's gasp tore through the silence. Blood splattered across his face as Rowan's power exploded. An overwhelming wave of chaotic mana erupted from him, devouring everything in its path. The room trembled, the air screamed. The director's body was hurled to the floor, lifeless. Rowan stood at the center of the storm, eyes glowing with unnatural light, his body trembling but unbroken. Blake could only stare, whispering in disbelief about Rowan's power, how he had managed to grasp blood-telling. Blake could only stare, whispering in disbelief about Rowan's power, how he had managed to grasp blood-telling, a forbidden art. But Rowan wasn't listening anymore. His gaze turned toward the grotesque tree. He stepped closer. His trembling hand reached out and touched the spectral image of Pauline. Tears streamed down his face as a gentle warmth flowed from her form into his chest, the last of her mana. The hideous tree pulsed once with a bright blue glow before crumbling into dust. When it was over, only a faint red light lingered, and the silence of grief filled the room. Rowan felt something shift deep inside him, a quiet breaking of who he once was. In that still moment, a new presence stirred within, echoing a single plea, just a little more time. A warm, nostalgic energy flowed through him. It was Pauline's mana. Her essence merged with his, carrying faint traces of memories and love long forgotten. He could almost hear her voice, reminding him that even in loneliness, love remains, that the people we hold in our hearts are never truly gone. He remembered her gentle guidance, how she once taught him to close his eyes and look inward, to find strength and warmth in the connections he cherished most. Even with time frozen around him, the bond he shared with his mother stayed eternal. That love became his anchor. Blake's impatient voice broke the silence. He asked if the touching reunion was finally over, saying he'd waited long enough. He spoke casually, but there was a threat behind his tone. He told Rowan to come with him or die quietly, though he admitted it would be a waste to kill someone with such potential. Rowan calmly asked where Blake planned to take him. Blake explained they would likely be sent to another farm, a place where children were turned into living trees, just like the grotesque one they'd destroyed. Rowan would help him manage them. That, Blake said proudly, was the work of Ratel, his organization. Their leader sought to reshape the world through black magic, and Blake served him faithfully. Rowan's eyes hardened. He asked if Blake had created the tree himself. Blake scoffed, claiming he merely tended to it, that it was the creation of the high priest. He tried to sound modest, though his smugness betrayed him. Then he pressed Rowan for an answer. Time was running out. Rowan's response was quiet but steady. He refused. Blake's smile faded. With a frustrated sigh, he lunged forward, sword flashing in the dim light, but before his blade could strike, blue lightning surged around Rowan, freezing the weapon midair. Blake's eyes widened. He couldn't move. Rowan stared at him coldly and asked the question that had haunted his thoughts. Did Blake kill Mother Pauline? Blake only sneered, asking why it mattered. Whether he did or didn't, what difference would revenge make? That was all Rowan needed to hear. The lightning around him intensified, crackling through the air as his voice rose, filled with raw power. He swore that he would not let Blake live. In a single motion, Rowan twisted his wrist, disarming his opponent. The sword clattered to the floor. He told Blake he should have dodged. A heartbeat later, a shard of solidified mana pierced through Blake's chest. Rowan looked at him with quiet fury, saying he had brought this upon himself. He would never forgive people like him. As Blake collapsed, a new sound echoed through the chamber. Heavy footsteps, many of them. Voices barked orders from above. Soldiers descended the staircase, their armor glinting faintly in the gloom. A commanding voice cut through the noise, identifying himself as Deputy Commander Oscar of the Union's Faith Division. Oscar studied the scene carefully. His sharp gaze landed on Rowan and the lingering energy around him. He asked if the boy had learned this kind of magic at Ratel. Rowan denied it. He said he had taught himself how to use mana. Oscar didn't believe it at first, but there was no deceit in the boy's eyes. Intrigued, he introduced himself and asked for Rowan's name. As they spoke, another Union soldier approached and reported that the mana tree appeared to be less than 2 years old. Oscar frowned. If a high priest had been involved, there should have been traces left behind. He wondered if another group had interfered, perhaps someone tied to Shia's Reist. Turning back to Rowan, Oscar complimented his skill and composure. He asked him to demonstrate again by calling the blade. Rowan lifted his hand and the broken sword shard flew effortlessly into his grasp. The display left Oscar quietly astonished, a 10-year-old child manipulating mana like a seasoned mage. Nearby, soldiers examined the remains of the tree. Oscar instructed them to search for more evidence. Rowan stood silently, staring at what was left of Pauline and the others. He whispered an apology to Theo for not playing with him more, and to Lily for not being kinder before she was gone. Oscar asked if he'd seen other trees like this before. Rowan nodded. He told them there were many farms, places just like this one. Oscar studied him carefully, noting how calm the boy seemed despite everything. He remarked that most children would have broken down by now, but Rowan's silence wasn't indifference. It was focus. Determined, Rowan looked at Oscar and asked to join their mission to help destroy Ratel's remaining farms. Oscar didn't answer immediately. He said they'd first complete their investigation, then decide what to do with him. For now, Rowan was to follow. As they left, Rowan passed the deputy director's corpse. Oscar paused only long enough to pick up a metal insignia from her body before ordering his men to move out. Outside, Union soldiers reported that there were no Faith Division casualties. The battle's toll was grim. 13 Ratel members dead, 3 from the shelter, and 2 who managed to escape. It was confirmed that high-ranking priests from Ratel had only intervened during the ritual's beginning, but no one could explain why it had collapsed so suddenly. Oscar ordered a full analysis from the 4th Stability Unit. As the soldiers began clearing the area, Rowan stepped into the cold air, his eyes set with quiet resolve. Whatever Ratel had done here, he would make sure it never happened again. Oscar listened to the report and gave a brief nod of approval before turning to Rowan. He asked where, in this grim place, the boy felt most comfortable. Rowan replied, without hesitation, the library. Oscar, expecting the conversation to take a while, suggested they continue there and let Rowan lead the way. Inside the familiar room, the two sat across from each other at a large wooden table. Oscar looked around, noticing there were no books about mana or magic. He asked how Rowan had managed to teach himself. Rowan simply said he figured it out on his own. When Oscar repeated the words of disbelief, Rowan smiled lightly and said he was just very smart. Oscar studied him for a moment and admitted he could tell the boy wasn't lying. Oscar then asked Rowan to tell him everything that had happened so far. Rowan paused, then began from the beginning how he came to the shelter, what he'd seen, and how things unfolded. His calm voice carried through the silent room, occasionally breaking as he glanced at the window. When he finished, he said he believed Mother Pauline had given him this power. Oscar listened carefully, still trying to understand. The boy had no formal training, yet had killed Augur and Blake both highly skilled. He dismantled a ritual crafted by Ratel's high priest and was still using magic without fatigue or ritual words. A talent like that couldn't stay hidden for long. When Rowan asked if he could pose a question, Oscar allowed it. Rowan asked about the tree. Oscar explained it was a black magic device, built using human life as the base. Rowan remembered the talk of fruit and wondered what Ratel wanted with it. Oscar said the fruit was a condensed form of life energy, a crystal of mana. He showed Rowan the withered fruit Blake had been carrying unfinished, but valuable. Eating it granted instant growth in mana and fetched huge sums on the black market. Rowan then asked about the reading sessions. Oscar said they were part of the ritual stability, a method to help the tree absorb mana and produce better fruit. Rowan thought back and said the tree always seemed to listen, almost like a person. Before becoming a tree, it had been human, with feelings. Oscar agreed quietly. When Rowan asked to continue, Oscar nodded. Rowan wanted to know what telekinesis was. Oscar explained it was a form of magic that allowed objects to move with mana, like how Rowan was manipulating the sword shard. Rowan accepted this, admitting he didn't know much about magic yet. Oscar estimated his telekinesis was at a class 1 level, though unconventional. Confirming Rowan's age as 9, he brought up the boy's earlier wish to join them. He asked why Rowan wanted to trust the Union when he had been betrayed before. Rowan admitted he didn't fully trust them, but said his intuition told him Oscar was a good person, someone bright and pure. The words caught Oscar off guard. He asked if trusting someone for that reason wasn't too naive. Rowan replied that he was good at reading people. Oscar explained that letting Rowan join wasn't his decision alone. The Union couldn't just involve an outsider. Rowan asked if that meant he wasn't strong enough. Oscar said ability wasn't everything, some things mattered more. Rowan's face fell, but Oscar clarified he didn't mean anything was wrong with him. It was just that making an exception wasn't simple. Rowan pressed if age mattered more than skill. Oscar admitted Rowan's talent was remarkable, but experience mattered in decision-making. When Rowan asked if Oscar meant his judgment was poor, Oscar chuckled awkwardly, saying he hadn't gone that far. To test him further, Oscar decided to treat the talk as a mock interview. He asked why Rowan killed Augur. Was it just because Agur grabbed his head? Rowan said he acted because he'd seen others do the same. Ager and Blake both had the intent to harm, so he didn't hesitate. Oscar questioned whether his anger clouded his judgment. Rowan said he didn't deny being emotional, but believed his emotions made his decision clearer. Too many had died because of Blake, and even if Blake repented, no one would forgive him. He said he didn't have the right to let them live. Oscar asked if he then had the right to kill. Rowan replied that since he had the power and took responsibility, it was fair. Still, he admitted he acted on his own judgment. If someone demanded accountability, he'd accept it. Oscar asked if killing them had truly been necessary. Rowan looked up and said someone had to do it. Oscar fell silent at that. Then Rowan looked straight at him and asked if that wasn't why the Union existed, to stop people like Blake and Ratel. The word struck Oscar deeply. He told Rowan that the Union's mission was to build a world where ordinary people could live in peace and pass that peace to future generations, a simple, human ideal worth protecting. He praised Rowan for his insight and composure, saying it was impressive for someone his age. Finally, Oscar explained that the Union's 1st Division was focused on eradicating Ratel's farms and restructuring its branches, a mission that could take years to complete. Oscar's tone shifted slightly as he looked at Rowan. He told the boy that if he truly wanted to help, things could be different. Rowan tilted his head, asking what he meant. Oscar's answer was simple. Go to the Union. Prove what you can do, and I'll recognize you as one of us. He added with a faint smile, shall I place some expectations on you? At the shelter gates, a horse stood ready. Oscar's voice carried authority as the Union members gathered around him. He briefed them on the mission, how Dungland Shelter had exploited orphans and runaways, hiding their crimes under the guise of religion, performing human sacrifices, and feeding Ratel's black magic. The Union, the sword and shield of the kingdom, had brought them down. Now, their task was to restore this place and prepare to move west at daybreak. He then called for Sienna, a cloaked knight who stepped forward. Rowan noticed the way her mana flowed calm and fluid, like mist on water. Oscar introduced Rowan as a key witness and instructed Sienna to escort him safely to the Union. Sienna, graceful and composed, greeted Rowan. She said the journey would take about 15 days and advised him to prepare what he needed. Rowan replied softly that he had nothing to pack. Sienna warned him there'd be no turning back and asked if he had any questions. Rowan, curious, asked if she was an elf. She confirmed she was a dark elf. Rowan blinked, admitting he expected dark elves to seem darker or gloomier. Sienna's lips twitched with amusement as he quickly apologized, explaining that meeting one in person just felt mysterious. Oscar chuckled, remarking it might have something to do with Rowan's bloodline. Before the boy could ask what that meant, Oscar helped him onto the horse beside Sienna. We'll meet again at the Union, he promised. Rowan wished Oscar and his team a safe journey, drawing a few surprised smiles from the usually stoic soldiers. And then, under the pale moonlight, Rowan and Sienna rode off into the night. Later, beneath the crescent moon, they sat beside a small campfire, the forest quiet except for the song of crickets. Sienna handed Rowan a small leather sheath she had crafted during their stops, a home for the mana blade he had created. Rowan accepted it with gratitude, calling her Runner Sienna, which made her chuckle. He wondered aloud if Big Sister might fit better, which made her glance away, clearly flustered. Then, grinning, he offered another title, Senior, since he'd soon be joining the Union. After a thoughtful pause, she replied, Do as you wish, with a faint smile. As they rested, Rowan practiced with his mana blade, the faint blue energy dancing in his hands. Sienna watched him closely and said his power was unlike anything she'd seen. Rowan recalled Oscar calling it telekinesis, but Sienna shook her head. Maybe it looks that way, she said softly, but it's not. When Rowan asked what it truly was, she admitted she didn't know. What she did know was that he could touch and command mana directly without spells or words. It was an ability that reminded her of the ancient elves, beings said to have vanished long ago. Looking at his eyes, she added quietly that his parents must have been remarkable people. The word parents lingered in the night air, and Rowan fell silent. Days later, their journey brought them to the crest of a hill. Sienna pointed ahead. Beyond the ridge stretched a vast, fortified city alive with movement. Even from afar, Rowan could see colorful banners fluttering and hear the faint hum of the market. Sienna explained that the Union City was divided into residential and commercial districts, a gathering point for all races and trades, but its true strength wasn't just its walls, it was the people. The strongest warriors, scholars, and mages on the continent lived there. That was why it was known as the Sword and the Book of the Continent, power and wisdom united to keep peace and balance among the 6 principalities. When they finally reached the towering gates, Sienna guided him through crowded streets until they stopped before a grand building. This will be your home for now, she told him, as the wooden doors swung open, revealing a sunlit courtyard beyond. A tall man greeted them, his arm covered in intricate tattoos glowed faintly with mana. He thanked Sienna for her effort and turned to Rowan with a warm smile. "I'm Lazarus," he said, director of the Union Administration Bureau. He confirmed Rowan's identity and invited him to talk inside. The room was bright, dazzling compared to the gloom Rowan had known for so long. He remembered Oscar's words about the Union being the sword and book of the continent. Lazarus embodied that idea, calm, powerful, and radiating intensity. Gesturing politely, Lazarus asked Rowan to extend his hand. The moment their palms met, Rowan's eyes widened. He felt the current of mana running through Lazarus's tattooed arm, refined, precise, and incredibly strong. Compared to this, his own power felt raw and unshaped. He realized he had only scratched the surface of what mana could truly be. Lazarus then asked about the brooch mentioned in the report, the one taken from the deputy director of the shelter. Rowan quickly clarified that it wasn't stolen. It had belonged to his grandmother. Lazarus, understanding, asked to see it. Rowan hesitated but handed it over. The instant the director touched it, Rowan felt an invisible pull as if their mana were connected. Lazarus's control was extraordinary, every flicker of energy exact, every pulse deliberate. Rowan pushed back instinctively, managing to counter the force with surprising precision. Lazarus gave a low chuckle, impressed. He said he'd been curious about the boy who could use telekinesis without chants or spells. Rowan admitted he'd been trying to mimic the director's mana flow out of curiosity. Lazarus smiled knowingly, saying he'd noticed. He examined the brooch, its star-shaped design catching the light, and commented that Rowan had a sharp eye for beauty. Rowan, studying him quietly, asked the question that had been forming in his mind. "Director Lazarus, are you the strongest person in the Union?" Lazarus laughed softly, dismissing the idea that he was the strongest in the Union. He joked that he was merely an old raccoon helping out where he could. Rowan blinked, taking the comment literally for a moment, and replied that he didn't look like a raccoon. Raccoons were much fluffier. Lazarus smiled, amused, and clarified that the true powerhouses were the division leaders, masters of extraordinary strength. And above, even them stood the governor, a figure so powerful that those leaders seemed like children in comparison. Rowan nodded, satisfied with the answer, then asked if he could visit again to ask more questions. Lazarus agreed, but reminded him to make an appointment first, since his schedule was often full. Rowan found the man kind, wise, and quietly strong. He liked him and thanked him sincerely before leaving. Later, Sienna guided Rowan to another enormous gate. It opened to reveal the Union School, a grand academy where the children of Union members studied while their parents were on missions. She explained that Rowan would stay there for the next 5 years, receiving both academic and combat training alongside other recruits. The school didn't focus on specific divisions or battle styles. Instead, it taught the fundamentals, magic theory, swordsmanship, and the foundation of all arts practiced across nations. Rowan's eyes widened with wonder. The idea of going to school filled him with excitement. Sienna noticed a genuine smile on his face and smiled softly in return as they entered the majestic academy building. Inside, Rowan stood in his new uniform. A woman greeted him warmly, noting that the uniform suited him well. When Rowan asked if she was a teacher, she laughed and introduced herself as Daphne, the head of academic affairs and the school's language instructor. She handed Rowan his first-year schedule and explained that he could choose elective subjects in addition to the required ones. As he read through the list, mana studies, swordsmanship, herbology, and more, his curiosity grew. He wanted to study everything. Without hesitation, he marked all of them. Daphne's eyes widened slightly when she saw his choices. She warned him that such a full schedule would be extremely difficult, especially with homework and exams. Studying, she said gently, wasn't as simple as it sounded. Rowan tilted his head, confused. Why would studying be difficult? He asked, genuinely curious. Daphne couldn't help but smile to herself. What an unusual child, she thought. She decided to inform the other teachers of his enthusiasm before leading him to his first class. They entered a vast lecture hall filled with students. Rowan took in the lively atmosphere, the buzz of conversation, the soft hum of mana in the air. Everyone around him radiated energy far denser than his own, and he could feel it clearly. The other students noticed too, their curious gazes lingering on him. Rowan realized that the issue truly lay with his body. His mana still wasn't as strong as it should be. Daphne introduced him to the class as a new student who had joined a bit late. Rowan stepped forward, remembering his old readings back at the shelter. With a polite smile, he introduced himself as Rowan from Dungland's shelter. The room fell silent for a moment before whispers spread through the crowd. He simply smiled and asked for their kind cooperation. Once seated, Daphne began the lesson, a fairy tale from page 24 of the textbook. She turned to Rowan, asking if he could read. Rowan nodded, saying he had learned at the shelter. Pleased, Daphne invited him to read aloud. As Rowan opened the book, a wave of nostalgia hit him. He recognized it instantly. It was the same collection of fairy tales teacher Amy had once read to him back at the shelter. Stories with strange titles like The Golden Pig's Delicious Poop and The Hairy Bride. He smiled faintly and A began to read. His voice was calm and clear as he told the story of a girl who tried everything to remove the hair growing on her knees. The more she plucked, the thicker it grew. As he read, he recalled Amy's troubled expression when she'd given him that very story. For a moment, he wondered if she had seen something of herself in that tale, if there had been a deeper meaning behind her choice of story. Then he shook the thought away. Some things were better left unexplored. He finished reading the passage where the girl finally found peace. Closing the book, Rowan reflected silently that understanding people was far more complicated than any lesson in class. A girl in the audience watched him thoughtfully, her expression unreadable. Then, the room erupted in applause. Even Daphne clapped with visible admiration. She thought to herself that an extraordinary child had just joined their school. After class, several students gathered around Rowan. They complimented his reading, saying the story had felt alive when he spoke. One of them added that they'd never seen Daphne so impressed before. Rowan thanked them politely, a little overwhelmed by the attention. Among the students, one girl stood quietly apart. She had brown hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to look straight through him. In her mind, a realization formed. She had seen him before. He was the same child who had appeared in the tree's vision, the one surrounded by ruin. Sophie Pavle, the class representative and president, approached Rowan with confidence and introduced herself. Rowan shook her hand politely and they exchanged a few pleasant words. Curious, Sophie Essol asked what elective he had chosen for his next class. Rowan replied that he had signed up for basic swordsmanship. Seeing the dagger at his waist, Sophie assumed he wanted to become a union member someday. Rowan didn't correct her, though in truth, he had signed up for every elective. Still, he asked if swordsmanship was necessary to join the union, admitting that holding a sword didn't feel quite natural to him. Sophie gave him a puzzled look, uncertain how to respond, while Rowan wondered if he had said something wrong. Before long, the students made their way to the swordsmanship training grounds. A strict-looking instructor stood waiting before a line of training dummies. Taking a deep breath, he shouted that the equipment would be distributed on a first-come, first-served basis. Instantly, the students bolted forward. Rowan blinked in surprise as his classmates rushed past him, shouting for him to hurry up. It took him a moment to notice. They were using mana to boost their speed. A spark of excitement lit up his eyes, so everyone here could use mana too. With a grin, he channeled his own energy and a flash of blue light surrounded him as he sprinted forward, effortlessly overtaking the others. The students gasped in disbelief. Sophie, among them, could hardly believe what she was seeing. Rowan moved like the wind, his small frame cutting through the air with impossible speed. He laughed, calling out to his new friends to catch him if they could. His laughter carried across the training field, filled with pure exhilaration. The instructor, Diego Sanchez, watched closely, eyebrows raised. That speed was beyond ordinary. Stroking his chin, he wondered if the boy had already undergone mana cultivation training. He decided to observe him carefully. Once everyone caught up, panting and sweating, Rowan stood completely unfazed. Running with mana alongside others had felt exhilarating. Sophie, on the other hand, was still catching her breath, looking at Rowan as though he might not even be human. She couldn't believe he wasn't tired at all. When Rowan commented that the run had been fun, she could only nod weakly in agreement, her mind racing with disbelief. After a short rest, Diego addressed the class, introducing himself as their basic swordsmanship instructor. He welcomed everyone and said he looked forward to working with Rowan, who politely returned the greeting. Then Diego ordered everyone to grab a wooden sword from the racks. Rowan didn't move. He stood quietly, watching the others collect their weapons. Diego noticed and asked why he hadn't picked one yet. A flicker of a dark memory crossed Rowan's face, an image of Blake wielding a sword. That cold, haunting memory. Softly, Rowan admitted that he didn't feel like holding a sword. Diego studied him for a moment before asking if he was afraid. Rowan nodded slightly and said that swords were dangerous tools and should be approached with caution. The instructor placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and told him that a sword, in the end, was only a tool. What mattered was the intent of the person holding it. Rowan repeated the words under his breath. Just a tool. He wondered if he would have felt the same way about staffs if Blake had used one instead. Taking a deep breath, he reached for a wooden sword and gave it a test swing. Diego observed silently, then remarked that Rowan had the qualities of a good swordsman, though his spirit still seemed hesitant. He announced that the students would now spar in pairs, using any means necessary to subdue their opponent. Rowan was paired with Sophie since they had been the first two to arrive. The two faced each other, both a little surprised. Sophie felt nervous but also determined. The other students whispered that Rowan might have been fast, but Sophie came from the Pavle family, known for its swordsmanship. There was no way she would lose. At Diego's command, the match began. Sophie launched forward, her wooden blade cutting through the air with practiced precision. Rowan watched her movements carefully, feeling the weight of her technique. She was strong, solid, disciplined, but there was no malice in her strikes. It was different from the violence he remembered. As he adjusted his footing, his body naturally settled into a calm, balanced stance, steady and instinctive. Both Sophie and Diego noticed immediately. His form was flawless, a stance perfect for both attack and defense. For someone holding a sword for the first time, it was unbelievable. Determined not to lose after the earlier race, Sophie clenched her jaw and struck again, this time faster and harder. Her sword came down in a fierce arc, but Rowan sidestepped effortlessly. She blinked in shock. Did he just dodge that? She swung again, aiming for his chest. Rowan parried. Another strike toward his shoulder, deflected. Then his head dodged again. Each of her blows met calm precision, his movements fluid and unhurried. And before Sophie could realize what had happened, Rowan shifted, turned his wrist, and gently tapped the wooden blade against her neck, signaling the match's end. The crowd went silent. Even Sophie stood frozen for a moment, staring at him in disbelief. Rowan, meanwhile, simply lowered his sword and offered a polite smile, unaware of how extraordinary he had just looked. Sophie quickly realized something astonishing. Rowan's sword hadn't stopped because of the instructor's command. It had stopped earlier, deliberately. He had read her movements before she even made them. Shock turned into admiration as she admitted her loss. But to her surprise, Rowan smiled and asked for another round. Amused and slightly competitive, she agreed. Later, as the students took a break, Sophie asked if Rowan enjoyed their sparring session. She admitted he was impressive, remarkably skilled for someone holding a sword for the first time. Rowan responded humbly, saying his early wins were pure luck, and that she'd clearly beaten him in the later rounds. Sophie grinned, telling him they should spar again sometime. As the group rested, another student sighed in relief, happy that the next class was basic magic studies, which they called an easy break. Rowan tilted his head, confused. He asked why learning magic would be considered a break if they were all training to become union members. His classmates exchanged surprised looks at his earnestness. One of them explained that magic wasn't simple. It demanded intense mental effort, and though their next teacher was one of the best, it was still a tough subject. Rowan's curiosity grew when he heard about this amazing person. Another student stared at him in disbelief before explaining that their next teacher was none other than the former Honored Division Commander and current Dean of Magic, Professor Arthur. When the class gathered in the large lecture hall, the atmosphere shifted. A strange, intricate magical device shimmered near the front. Then, the door creaked open and an elderly man stepped inside. Professor Arthur himself. His neatly trimmed white beard and calm, intelligent eyes carried both wisdom and authority. The students immediately straightened, watching him in awe. Sophie leaned closer to Rowan, whispering that this was the teacher she mentioned earlier, the legendary Dean of Magic. Rowan could sense the dense, powerful mana radiating from him, even stronger than what he had felt from Director Lazaros. It made him wonder how powerful the top figures in the Union truly were. Professor Arthur greeted the class, noting there was a new student. Rowan stood and introduced himself politely. He remarked that some students might find the class boring just from observation, his tone teasing yet sharp. A few students chuckled nervously, clearly already tired. Rowan, however, remained determined. He silently promised himself he'd become a magician and join the Union, no matter how long it took. Arthur seemed amused by his enthusiasm, calling him a spirited child. But then, he asked if Rowan understood that the path of magic was far more difficult and demanding than swordsmanship. The question made Rowan recall his classmates' earlier reactions. He admitted he'd just learned about it and asked why that was the case. Instead of answering, Arthur gestured towards Sophie, inviting her to explain. She explained that magic required immense study, precise control, and placed heavy strain on both body and mind. Even with rare talent, it took a decade just to reach Class 1 status. Arthur nodded, confirming her words. He added that most students couldn't become full-fledged Union members upon graduation because of that difficulty. Rowan listened closely, his mind already turning over the challenge. He realized that even achieving Class 1 wasn't enough to fight alongside the others. It only made one a provisional member. Remembering Oscar's advice, Rowan said with sudden conviction that he would aim for Class 3 magic before graduation. The bold declaration made Arthur pause, one eyebrow arching in surprise. With a faint, knowing smile, the professor asked if Rowan even understood what Class 3 entailed. Rowan admitted sheepishly that he didn't know much about it at all. Arthur sighed lightly, amused by the boy's naive confidence. Then let's start from the beginning, he said, turning toward the large blackboard as the lesson on real magic was about to begin. Professor Arthur began his lesson by addressing a fundamental truth. The Union was largely composed of swordsmen, while magic had evolved into a discipline that sought truth and wisdom rather than combat. He turned to the blackboard, his chalk moving swiftly as he wrote a sequence of intricate runes. It was, he explained, a spell to create a fire arrow. Then he asked the class if anyone could spot the mistake. Rowan examined the spell carefully. It was complex and beautiful, yet something about it felt oddly familiar, like the markings he had seen in the pit and near the cursed tree at the shelter. When no one answered, Arthur reassured them that it was fine. Even simple spells could be deceptive. He cast the flawed version and a flickering flame appeared, weak, unstable, on the verge of collapse. Rowan watched while fascinated by how fragile the fire was. Arthur explained that magic was incredibly precise, and even the smallest error could ruin a spell. Then, with a single correction to one rune, he recast it. This time, the fire arrow burst into existence with radiant intensity, stable and strong. The class gasped in amazement. Arthur used the moment to explain that even tiny adjustments could alter a spell's nature, but to find those details, a magician needed immense patience and understanding. He demonstrated how the same spell could be modified into a fireball, but warned that it required more mana and placed greater strain on both mind and body. When he asked why magic reached its limits faster than swordsmanship, Sophie answered immediately. She explained that channeling mana through a weapon to form an aura was more efficient than shaping it directly into magic. Arthur smiled, impressed, and confirmed her reasoning. He added that because of this inefficiency, magic consumed enormous amounts of power, exhausting both energy and spirit. As Rowan took notes, a realization dawned on him. The strength of magic was tied to the magician's mana. Those with vast reserves, like Director Lazarus or Arthur himself, could command powerful spells with ease, but his own mana felt modest by comparison. Still, he refused to feel discouraged. If he studied deeply, perhaps even he could learn to wield magic like that someday. Arthur turned to Rowan and asked what was needed to manifest the spell they had just seen. Rowan answered that it would be the written spell itself. Arthur agreed, but pointed out that casting such a long sequence each time was impractical. That, he explained, was why magicians used condensed versions called magic circles, complex diagrams that stored an entire spell's structure. Rowan's curiosity spiked. He asked if this was similar to the markings engraved on Director Lazarus's body. Arthur nodded, confirming that some magicians carved magic circles onto themselves to cast spells more quickly. Rowan silently absorbed this, his mind racing with the implications. Arthur went on to clarify that if spells were like equations, then magic circles were their symbols. Rowan's eyes lit up with understanding. He asked if incantations were spells converted into spoken language. Arthur paused, clearly intrigued, and asked how Rowan had come to that conclusion. Rowan explained that the rune sequence for the fire arrow looked like a blueprint. If the circles were symbols, then spoken incantations must be the language form of those same equations. Arthur was genuinely impressed. He said that Rowan was thinking on a level that even senior magicians once debated. To demonstrate, Arthur explained that spoken magic relied on precise arrangement of words and intent, what scholars called true names or word commands. He uttered a single resonant word, and a swirling vortex of fire roared to life before him, far more powerful than anything shown earlier. He explained that mastery wasn't just about the words themselves, but also their rhythm, tone, and emotion. Rowan found the idea fascinating. It reminded him of his own experience with reading aloud, the way emotion and intention could shape the outcome. Satisfied, Arthur ended the lecture by saying he hoped they now understood just how demanding magic truly was. Then he looked directly at Rowan and asked if he still wished to pursue it. Rowan didn't hesitate. His eyes burned with even greater resolve as he answered yes. Arthur chuckled, clearly pleased by his spirit. He announced that in their next class, they would begin studying ancient language and handed out reading assignments. The rest of the students groaned at the heavy workload, but Rowan seemed almost excited. Later that evening, as they walked through a softly lit corridor, Sophie complained about the endless homework, wondering why she had signed up for so many classes. Rowan, walking beside her, admitted he'd filled his entire schedule too, every day, except for lunch. Sophie stared at him in disbelief, then sighed and said he was way too enthusiastic for his own good. Rowan just smiled, saying studying was the most enjoyable thing he'd ever done. Sophie rolled her eyes and muttered that he was impossible. Sophie asked Rowan where his room was, and he pointed toward the second room from the end on the first floor. She mentioned that it was the same room as someone named Lucas, a name unfamiliar to Rowan, before bidding him goodnight with a sleepy yawn. Later, in his room, Rowan sat at his desk, studying the intricate scripts from Arthur's lessons. The symbols were complex, but as he examined them, he began to understand how spells were formed. Since his mana wasn't yet strong enough for advanced magic, an idea came to him. What if he created a spell that matched his own abilities? Concentrating deeply, he gathered his mana, and a small whirl of fire started to spin in his hands. With a final push of focus, a tiny but steady fireball came to life. Rowan had done it. He had successfully formed a spell on his own. Encouraged, he experimented further, trying to manipulate its structure. But soon, the fireball wavered and vanished. The strain was too much. Rowan's vision blurred and he collapsed from exhaustion, falling asleep right there on the floor. Sometime later, his door creaked open. A boy with bright red hair stepped in. Lucas. He looked down at Rowan, puzzled by the sight of papers scattered everywhere and the boy lying unconscious. Kneeling beside him, he asked why Rowan was sleeping there, but Rowan could barely hear him, his mind drifting in and out. He faintly caught the voices of Sienna and Director Lazaros, speaking in hushed tones, expressing guilt for pushing him too hard despite his potential. When Rowan finally woke, he found Lucas leaning over him, looking both relieved and curious. Lucas told him how he'd found him collapsed and had brought him to the infirmary. Rowan blinked, confused, as Lucas introduced himself as Lucas von Pacquiao, his roommate and classmate. He mentioned that his father, Oscar von Pacquiao, was the deputy commander of the Faith, a revelation that surprised Rowan. Lucas grinned and jokingly told him to make sure to tell his father that he'd taken great care of him. As they talked, Rowan noticed Lucas's mana was strong and steady, clearly the result of years of hard training. Despite looking older and more mature, Lucas revealed he was only 12, explaining that he'd failed twice due to attendance issues. He laughed it off, saying studying wasn't really his strength. Lucas then asked if Rowan had been practicing magic before he collapsed, mentioning that his room looked like a disaster. Rowan admitted he'd managed to create a fireball before blacking out. Lucas chuckled and said he could help if it were swordsmanship instead, since that was his focus. Naturally, being the son of a knight commander. Rowan admired Lucas's build and discipline, silently vowing to work harder himself. When Lucas suggested skipping classes to get some fresh air, Rowan hesitated but agreed after feeling dizzy. Lucas eagerly agreed, saying a little breeze, food, and relaxation were the best remedies for a tired mind. Rowan couldn't help but think that this carefree attitude was probably the reason Lucas had failed his classes twice. They soon arrived at a busy town square filled with laughter and movement. Lucas encouraged Rowan to eat well, worried he might collapse again. As they explored, Rowan's attention was drawn to a nearby magic shop overflowing with mana energy. Lucas followed him inside, commenting on how strange the air felt. Inside, the place was filled with glowing artifacts and faint magical hums that made Lucas wince slightly. As Rowan admired the items, a realization hit him he didn't have any money. The coins he'd earned back at the shelter weren't his to keep. Seeing his disappointed expression, Lucas asked what was wrong. When Rowan admitted he couldn't afford anything, Lucas smiled and said he'd buy him whatever he wanted, since his father had told him to look after him. Rowan was taken aback, wondering how wealthy Lucas must be. Lucas quickly waved it off, admitting he couldn't buy everything in the shop and showed a small handful of coins, grinning sheepishly. The two stood there, surrounded by glowing relics and gentle hums of magic, one eager, the other quietly grateful, their friendship beginning to form in the soft light of the enchanted shop. Rowan's mood sank again, and Lucas sighed, telling him to just pick one thing for now. Something small, maybe a book. It would at least keep him busy for months. He muttered under his breath about how expensive books had become, while Rowan's eyes wandered toward a peculiar item said to bloom only under moonlight. Wanting to find something more affordable, he continued to browse. That's when his gaze stopped on a strange, dark, egg-shaped stone resting quietly on a shelf. Curious, Rowan picked it up. A faint, murky aura surrounded it, and a magic circle shimmered faintly across its surface. He figured that might be why the price was so low. It felt mysterious, oddly captivating. The shopkeeper noticed his interest and walked over, explaining that the object was known as the Stone of Goetia. He admitted he had almost forgotten it was even in stock. Rowan asked what it was used for, and the shopkeeper replied that it was mostly decorative now. The egg hadn't shown signs of awakening in years. When Rowan asked if something was sealed inside, the man nodded. It was said to contain an unknown entity, trapped by a magic circle long ago in the southern lands of Rotos. The seal had remained unchanged ever since. The shopkeeper explained that magical tools were objects imbued with magic, but this one had never displayed any power. Rowan wondered aloud if something could awaken if the seal were broken. The man smiled slightly, saying that in theory, yes, but it would require a level of magic few could ever hope to achieve. Rowan studied the intricate circle again, whispering to himself about its complexity. It was far beyond the level of a simple fireball. Lucas, watching him from the side, asked what he thought. Rowan decided it was more interesting than a book, and jokingly that it looked sturdy enough to throw or hit something with. Without overthinking, he chose to buy it. After paying and thanking the shopkeeper, the two left the store. Outside, Rowan held the stone of Gosha in his hands, a faint smile forming on his face. Lucas clapped him on the shoulder and said there was somewhere else he wanted to take him. Rowan blinked confusion and asked where they were going. Lucas grinned and declared it was to the coolest place in the entire Union. Their destination turned out to be the Union's Grand Clock Tower, a magnificent structure that pierced the sky. Rowan stared in awe at the gleaming tower as the sun dipped behind it. Lucas also asked if it was impressive and Rowan nodded, asking if this was really the Union's center. Lucas confirmed it, explaining that the governor and the captain both resided there. When Rowan asked if he'd ever met them, Lucas said he had once seen the former captain as a child, describing him as a man in a white suit, someone who stood out like a swan among crows. Rowan admitted he didn't know much beyond what he'd read in books, that even a commander of the 7th rank possessed power enough to subdue an entire city. The captain who led those commanders, he mused, must be strong enough to conquer a whole nation. And above all of them stood the governor, a being so powerful that even kings acknowledged his authority. As they gazed at the massive clock tower glowing in the sunset, Rowan gripped the stone of Gosha tightly. Those figures, the governor, the captain, they seemed impossibly distant now. But deep inside, Rowan felt a quiet determination. Someday, he would reach their level too. He commented on how enormous the tower was, visible from almost anywhere in the Union. Lucas laughed, confirming that it could even be seen from their school. Looking closer, Rowan noticed strange red markings on the clock face and asked what they meant. Lucas scratched his head, trying to recall, explaining that the symbols on the red outer ring were supposed to mark the years, though he wasn't quite sure how to read them. After a bit of guessing, he decided it must be the year 262. Rowan studied the clock again and deduced that the symbols also indicated the month and day, June 14th. Lucas was impressed, asking how he figured it out. Rowan didn't answer. He simply stared up at the clock tower, a realization dawning on him. It was the same tower he had seen in the vision shown by the ancient tree. The same date too, June 14th, but 10 years in the future. Later that evening, back in their dorm room, Lucas grabbed his wooden sword, saying he needed to make up for lost training time. Rowan asked where he was going, and Lucas explained that skipping even one day made him feel sluggish. With a grin, he promised to be back soon and left. Rowan sat quietly on his bed, gazing out the window. The image of the tree and its vision refused to leave his mind. Could it have been a prophecy rather than a dream? If so, what was he supposed to do about it? Closing his eyes, he let his mana ripple softly around him, focusing on recalling every detail. He began sorting through the memories, each vision, each moment marked by the clock tower. He tried arranging them by the time shown on the tower's face, piecing together fragments in chronological order. He remembered a building with a red roof still intact, placing it first. Then came the memory of a runner dying after that same roof collapsed. Piece by piece, the visions aligned. And as Rowan reconstructed the sequence, one final image grew clearer in his mind, a glimpse of the future waiting for him beyond the flow of time. Rowan studied the fragmented visions with unwavering focus, his eyes reflecting both curiosity and determination. Among the swirling images, he saw Sophie, Lucas, and Senior Sienna, all fallen. Then, he saw himself. Realizing he needed to understand his rank in that future, he searched through the fragments until he found one containing his own image. The vision shifted to a scene of devastation. His future self stood before a burning clock tower, the sky lit with flames. From that angle, his rank badge wasn't visible. Concentrating, he altered the perspective until the view changed, revealing a cloaked figure standing in the inferno. A crack split through the vision as he saw his older self, surrounded by chaos and fire. His future self's expression twisted in confusion, then horror. Blood stained his collar. In the reflection of his eye, the cloaked figure loomed closer. The realization struck like a dagger. He was going to die in 10 years. As his future self collapsed before the burning tower, Rowan's consciousness snapped back. He opened his eyes, breathing heavily as the weight of that grim prophecy settled on him. Sitting silently, he wondered if this was a warning from the tree. If the Union fell, so would the kingdom and the entire continent with it. The end of the world itself. He recalled that the tree had been created through black magic, born from human sacrifices trapped between life and death. Perhaps, just as Pauline's spirit had reached him before, another powerful will had merged with the tree's vision to show him this future. But he refused to accept it as fate. To make the vision false, he needed to reshape reality. He decided to focus first on his own path. Since he couldn't determine his future rank, the color of his badge didn't matter yet. He reasoned that if he didn't become a guild member or administrative staff, he might have to take the path of the white suit. As dawn's light spilled into his room, Rowan prepared for school. Lucas stopped by to tell him that teacher Daphne wanted to see him in the faculty office. Rowan asked if it was just him. surprised when Lucas said yes and left casually, telling him they'd meet later in class. In Daphne's office, concern softened her tone as she asked if he was feeling better. Rowan smiled faintly and thanked her for her care, saying he was fine now. She reminded him not to overwork himself and offered to adjust his schedule if needed. Rowan politely declined, saying he genuinely enjoyed all his classes. Daphne apologized for pushing him too much, and he assured her there was no need to worry. Before he left, she offered counseling if he ever needed it. Walking away, Rowan felt a renewed sense of purpose. He needed to keep learning. Training had to become second nature, but he couldn't do it alone. His friends had to grow stronger too. When he entered the common area, Sophie and the others greeted him warmly, relieved he had recovered. He thanked them sincerely, though deep down the memory of that vision haunted him. He hoped that, by strengthening everyone together, they might survive the fate he'd seen. He began asking his classmates about their elective classes: Isidore, Mesa, Rain, Kirsten, Aiden, Darian, Tick, and Kidos. None of them were in swordsmanship. Then Flora, Sebastian, Aona, Deus, Sabrina, and Wella. None took basic magic either. The students were surprised that he remembered every name. Sophie curiously asked why he was suddenly interested in everyone's classes. Rowan explained that he had tried both swordsmanship and magic, found both valuable, and wanted them all to join him in learning. The girls agreed enthusiastically, but one boy hesitated about magic. Rowan gently encouraged him to see it from a different perspective, and offered to show them directly instead of explaining. He turned to Lucas and asked him to attend just one magic class. Though reluctant, Lucas eventually agreed, muttering under his breath but unable to resist Rowan's sincere smile. Later, in the magic classroom, the air buzzed with energy. A mana measuring device glowed faintly in the center. Teacher Arthur raised an eyebrow at the unusually large crowd, amused. "So the rumors were true," he said with a grin. Rowan convinced the whole class to join. Seeing Rowan among the students, Arthur asked if he was feeling better. Rowan nodded with quiet confidence, ready for whatever came next. Arthur couldn't help but remark that it was the liveliest the magic class had ever been. The credit, of course, went to Rowan. When asked about it, Rowan explained his simple goal: to show his classmates that magic wasn't as distant or difficult as they imagined. Arthur, intrigued by the boy's confidence, asked how he intended to do that. Rowan requested permission to demonstrate, and Arthur allowed it, though he warned him not to push himself too hard. As Rowan stepped forward, whispers filled the classroom. Lucas and Sophie exchanged glances, both half in awe and half in disbelief at how fearless Rowan seemed. Meanwhile, outside the classroom, a quiet group had gathered. Director Lazarus arrived earlier than expected, greeted by teacher Daphne, who immediately asked if his visit was because of Rowan. Lazarus replied that he was there for several reasons, reminding her that overseeing the academy fell under the Administration Bureau's responsibility. Knight Sienna stood beside them silently. When questioned, she explained that she still had a mission from Deputy Commander Oscar. Moments later, teacher Diego appeared, surprising Daphne. She noted it was unusual for him to attend a class outside swordsmanship training. Diego admitted that curiosity had brought him. Everyone seemed to be talking about the sudden interest in magic. Even the school principal arrived, chuckling that he couldn't stay away when the director himself was present. Daphne sighed, clearly exasperated by the growing audience, and asked everyone to remain quiet so as not to disturb the students. They all agreed, and the room fell into silence. Through the small crack in the door, their eyes widened. Inside, a giant fireball swirled in midair, bathing the room in fiery light. Rowan stood at the center, calm and composed, ancient-looking runes glowing behind him as the inferno pulsed under his control. Around the students, a translucent blue shield shimmered, protecting them from the heat. Arthur's eyes widened. "A fireball," he whispered to himself. This wasn't ordinary magic. It was far beyond what any first year could achieve. Even a simpler spell like Fire Arrow was something only top fifth-year students could perform. The scale and control of Rowan's spell were unheard of. The principal, observing through the door, marveled at the purity of the flame, saying it resembled the sacred light of science holy magic. Diego noted the density and stability of the energy, while Lazarus added that it was far too controlled to be a simple spell. Maintaining such intensity while keeping the flames suspended in one place required mastery most adults didn't have. Sienna observed quietly, recalling the first time she met Rowan and sensed his unique mana perception. The principal smiled faintly, remembering Rowan's humble beginnings at the shelter, amazed at how far he had come. Inside, Rowan remained focused, though beads of sweat began forming on his forehead. Daphne grew uneasy, remembering how he had collapsed just a day earlier. She wondered if this was too much for him, but hesitated to interrupt. Rowan steadied his breathing, reminding himself that control mattered more than power. He focused on keeping the mana flow balanced. His eyes flicked toward Arthur's blue barrier surrounding the students. It fascinated him. It reminded him of something from the shelter, though the intent was entirely different. He briefly wondered what would happen if his fireball collided with that barrier. Looking toward his instructor, Rowan asked with genuine curiosity about the magic protecting everyone, complimenting Arthur's craftsmanship. Arthur, feeling the pressure of the moment, tried to remain composed while strengthening his own spell. The blue barrier thickened, surrounding Rowan's fireball until the two magics intertwined. Slowly, the fiery sphere dissipated, its energy fading into harmless light. The room exhaled collectively. Rowan looked a bit embarrassed, while Arthur struggled to decide whether to reprimand or praise him. Director Lazaro stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. He commended Rowan for his sharp observation and answered his earlier question, explaining that the magic he had seen was Dean Arthur's original spell, the Azure Flame Barrier. Rowan admired the name, though Arthur brushed it off, saying he hadn't even chosen it himself. Arthur then turned the question back to Rowan. "And what about yours? What do you call that?" Rowan replied honestly, saying it was just a fireball. Arthur smiled faintly. "You and I both know it's not just a fireball," he said. Rowan admitted he hadn't thought of a name yet, which made Arthur laugh softly, amused that the boy's focus had shifted from the danger of his act to naming his magic. At that moment, Lazaro stepped in again, his tone becoming more serious. As the director of administration, he couldn't ignore what had just happened. He asked Rowan to explain why he had chosen to perform such a risky spell in front of everyone. Rowan's response was calm and sincere. He said, first, he was confident in his ability to control the flame, and second, he trusted Teacher Arthur to be watching over him in case something went wrong. Arthur then asked if this demonstration had been his only goal. Rowan nodded, smiling brightly. He explained that he wanted to give his friends courage, to show them that magic wasn't as unreachable as they thought. Many believed they'd be lucky to conjure even a basic fireball before graduation. Yet, he had done it already. And with that, he hoped to inspire them to try. Rowan smiled and said he only wanted to show everyone what was possible. Teacher Arthur listened quietly, struck by a mix of admiration and humility. In that moment, he realized how much he might have been limiting his students without even meaning to. To think that such a young boy had made him recognize that truth, it was both humbling and inspiring. Rowan then turned to Arthur, asking politely if he could use the floor a little longer. He said there was something more he wanted to share with his classmates. Arthur nodded without hesitation, giving his permission. Rowan's gaze moved toward Lucas. "Come here for a moment," he called out, catching his friend off guard. Lucas froze, unsure what Rowan had in mind, but eventually walked up to the front of the room, looking both nervous and confused. Rowan explained that he wanted to help him try casting a spell. He told Lucas that magic and swordsmanship weren't so different. Both required channeling mana, and since Lucas trained daily, he could definitely do it. Lucas, still doubtful, muttered that he had no idea how he was supposed to use magic. Rowan thought for a moment, then suggested they try a simple incantation. It would be easier than working with circles or advanced spells. Teacher Arthur stepped forward to assist and recited a short incantation in the ancient language. Lucas tried to repeat it, but stumbled over the words, earning a gentle correction from Rowan. With a teasing smile, Rowan asked if this was Lucas's first time hearing ancient language, then playfully added that it was impressive for someone in his third year as a first-year student. Lucas flushed red and asked if Rowan hadn't realized that before. Rowan laughed it off and said they'd focus on learning the meaning instead because, as he explained, understanding the words was just as important as speaking them. He translated the line for everyone, the footsteps of a quietly breathing flame, the after-image of air dying from heat. Lucas shuddered at the poetic phrasing, calling it way too cringe. Rowan pressed on, continuing with the next line, collide with each other without hesitation, appear before my eyes. Sophie and the others listened closely, intrigued but confused. Rowan paused, realizing something wasn't right. Why wasn't it working? Why didn't anyone seem to understand? If they couldn't grasp even the first step, how would they manage in the years to come? He began to worry about the path ahead, about how he could change the future he'd seen. Lucas noticed his unease and softly called his name. Before Rowan could answer, Arthur placed a reassuring hand on both of their shoulders. He reminded Rowan gently that this was Lucas's very first magic class. He couldn't expect instant results. But before Arthur could continue, Rowan surprised him again. Calmly, he asked if Arthur could show him the actual spell formula instead. Arthur blinked, curious about where this was going. Then, without warning, a piece of chalk floated off the desk and rose into the air. The class gasped as it began to move across the board on its own. Director Lazaros, watching with amusement, murmured that Rowan seemed to have telekinetic talent as well. Within moments, glowing blue runes spread across the blackboard, forming a complex and beautiful spell structure. Arthur's eyes widened. "Where did you see this formula?" he asked. Rowan replied that he hadn't copied it from anywhere. He'd simply observed what Arthur had written earlier and adjusted it in his own way. Lazaro stepped closer, saying this was far more than a small adjustment. Rowan, without arrogance, explained that The arrangement felt more natural to him, something that suited how his mana flowed. Lazaro stared at the board, almost in disbelief. "Are you saying you created an entirely new spell formula?" he asked. Rowan looked down shyly, not quite sure how to respond. Arthur and Lazarus exchanged a knowing glance. Finally, Lazarus suggested that this conversation was far too important to rush. He proposed they continue it later and asked Teacher Daphne if she agreed. She smiled and said, "Of course." Lazarus thanked Rowan for sharing his work, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We'll talk again soon," he said warmly. Rowan nodded quietly in response. Before leaving, Lazarus turned to the dark elf knight. "And you are?" he asked. She straightened. "Faith Division, Sienna," she replied formally. To her surprise, Lazarus immediately asked if she could take over the remaining classes for the day. He said she was free to conduct them however she wished. Let the students study on their own or even practice swordsmanship if she preferred. Though caught off guard, Sienna bowed slightly and agreed. Teacher Diego then added with a grin that she could handle his next class too. Sienna sighed but forced a polite, "Yes, senior." As Lazarus, Arthur, and Rowan prepared to leave, Arthur's blue mana shimmered faintly around his hand. "Shall we?" he said, and the group exited the lecture hall. Left behind, Sienna stood before the curious and restless students. Taking a steady breath, she clapped her hands to regain their attention. Introducing herself properly, she said she'd be temporarily handling their lessons for the day. She urged everyone to participate and treat it like a regular class. Inside, however, she couldn't help but sigh, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Of all the things she expected today, becoming an impromptu teacher wasn't one of them. The faculty gathered in the grand conference hall of Union Academy, their expressions tense and curious. An emergency meeting hadn't been called in years, and some of the younger professors looked uneasy. At the head of the long table sat Director Lazarus, calm as ever, his measured voice carrying the authority that silenced the room. He began by addressing the reason for the sudden meeting, a boy named Rowan. The young prodigy had done something extraordinary, something that defied conventional understanding of magic. Professor Arthur took over, explaining that Rowan had altered a fireball spell in a completely new way. It wasn't particularly powerful, but the method was revolutionary. A freshman had deconstructed and rebuilt a known spell, something most magicians never dared to attempt. Naturally, some faculty members were skeptical, but the Dean of Magic Studies had already confirmed its authenticity. Lazarus announced that the Bureau would conduct a deeper analysis, but for now, they had to accept that a student may have discovered a new way to understand magic itself. Debate followed. Should someone so gifted receive specialized education? Or should the academy maintain its standard system for all students? Personal instruction was against policy, yet losing such a mind to poor management would be unforgivable. Suggestions flew across the room, even one proposing that Rowan join the union early, but that idea was quickly rejected. When Dean Arthur was asked if there were other concerns about the boy, he hesitated. Eventually, he admitted that Rowan might lack emotional awareness. He wasn't unkind, but perhaps too detached, too logical. Arthur worried that in the union, where teamwork mattered, Rowan's personality might create friction. Still, others defended him. He was just a boy, a genius, yes, but still learning how to connect with others. Director Lazarus, seeing the discussion going in circles, suggested something simple. Bring Rowan in for an interview. The room agreed. A few moments later, the young prodigy walked into the room, nervous but composed. Professor Daphne spoke first, asking how he felt after the incident with his friend Lucas. Rowan admitted he was frustrated. Not at Lucas, but at himself for failing to understand his friend's strengths. He had pressured Lucas without realizing it, thinking he was helping, when in fact, he might have been overstepping. Arthur comforted him, and Rowan explained that he only wanted everyone to grow stronger together, not just in magic, but as a team. His sincerity melted away the professor's earlier doubts. When the meeting ended, they agreed on one thing. The boy was special, not just in ability, but in heart. That very night, the Academy's education system began to change. The new policy aimed to balance academic excellence with emotional and social development. By morning, a fresh announcement echoed across the training grounds. Both swordsmanship and magic would now be mandatory for all students. Rowan, Lucas, and Sophie were assigned to train together under the watchful eye of Professor Diego Sanchez. Their sessions were lively. Lucas, ever confident, challenged Rowan to spar. Sophie joined in next, only to find her sword knocked from her hand within moments. Still, she refused to give up. She asked Rowan for advice, and he gently explained how her mana flow could be improved. Lucas chimed in with his usual teasing remarks, earning a few laughs. Watching them, Professor Diego smiled, realizing that perhaps Rowan's personality issues were nothing more than youthful innocence. Days later, Rowan met with Professor Daphne again. He had grown closer to his classmates, learning to appreciate their strengths and quirks. But he was also confused, especially when some girls invited him to go shopping or see flowers. He couldn't understand why they choose that over studying. Daphne couldn't help but laugh. After all, he was at the age where such things begin to matter. When asked if there was a girl he felt close to, Rowan mentioned Sophie. She was strong, talented, and burdened by her noble background. He admired her resilience. He also spoke fondly of Lucas, though he half-joked that his friend's brain was made of muscle. Later, Rowan visited Dean Arthur to discuss his weak physical constitution. Despite his immense magical talent, his body couldn't handle powerful spells. The dean explained that improving one's constitution was difficult. Magic tools and elixirs were rare. Yet, out of faith and affection for his student, Arthur offered him a precious elixir he had long kept as a personal treasure. Rowan hesitated, then took it. The pill dissolved within him like liquid fire, spreading energy through his veins. For a brief moment, he felt on the verge of something extraordinary, and then it was gone. The elixir had no effect. Arthur sighed, disappointed but unsurprised. Rowan, however, smiled faintly. Instead of chasing shortcuts, he would build his own path. If his body could not handle existing magic, then he would reshape magic itself. He would create a new branch of sorcery, one that belonged only to him. That was the beginning of Rowan's true journey, not just to master magic, but to redefine it. 6 months had passed since the day Professor Arthur gave Rowan that mysterious white pill. Nothing dramatic had come of it. It had simply been a kind and hopeful gesture. Now, half a year later, the young prodigy stood once again before the Academy's most powerful figures. Today was the final exam for the first-year Magic Studies course. Rowan stood calmly before Dean Arthur and Director Lazarus, his hands glowing as 2 perfect fireballs floated above his palms. The flames danced with precision, neither flickering nor wavering. A flawless display of control. The 2 senior mages exchanged impressed glances. Rowan then pushed further, feeding more mana into the flames until they swelled in size, roaring like twin suns. It was pure mastery. Though the display was breathtaking, Rowan couldn't shake the thought that his magic lacked true destructive power. Dean Arthur smiled reassuringly, telling him that casting without incantation already placed him on par with a 4th-class mage. Power wasn't everything. What mattered was his understanding, his ability to shape and rewrite magic itself. The dean gave him a new challenge, to analyze and reconstruct every spell up to 4th class using his own methods. To help him, Rowan was granted unrestricted access to the library's ancient archives. Before ending the session, the dean and the director formed a secret pact, a mage's vow to protect Rowan's condition. As they clasped hands and began chanting an old, solemn hymn, Rowan tilted his head, completely unaware that he was witnessing a binding ritual. To him, it just looked like 2 old men performing an odd tradition in the middle of his exam. Another year went by. Rowan and his friends were now in their 3rd year at the Union Academy. Professor Diego gathered the faculty for an emergency meeting, his face unusually serious. He announced that, from this point forward, Rowan would no longer participate in physical training or swordsmanship involving mana. The decision shocked everyone until Diego explained that Rowan's focus should now be entirely on magic. Dean Arthur understood the weight of that choice. Rowan was a treasure, the kind of genius any teacher would want to hold onto forever, but letting him grow freely was the right thing to do. Sienna Runner, who had recently joined the teaching staff, asked about Rowan's combat ability. Diego chuckled. Rowan only needed to draw his sword to pass the Union's first entrance test. His strength was that natural. Professor Daphne then turned to the dean and asked about Rowan's magical progress. Arthur fell silent, then admitted that there was nothing left for him to teach. Rowan had surpassed him. The boy could cast 1st and 2nd-class magic effortlessly and was now reconstructing 3rd-class spells like they were puzzles for children. He was, in every sense, a monster of talent, and with his growing charm, the young women of the academy couldn't help but be drawn to him, though Rowan himself remained oblivious, buried in his studies. Later that day, after class, Arthur called Rowan to his office. He wanted to tell him about an upcoming event, the long-forgotten Magic Scholarship Exchange Tournament. It was once a prestigious meeting between scholars of different nations, but had been discontinued years ago when magic began to decline. Now, it was being revived, because of Rowan. Arthur explained that news of Rowan's achievements had reached a faraway kingdom called Schwarin, home to the legendary Magic Tower. Its tower master, a duke of immense power, ruled over the last autonomous magical nation. The scholars of Schwarin, intrigued by rumors of a 4th-class mage emerging from the Union, had invited Rowan to debate their best mages in an academic exchange. Rowan was taken aback. He didn't even consider himself a 4th-class mage yet. Still, the dean encouraged him. It was a chance to prove himself on a grand stage, and there was a prize, a rare and powerful elixir. That word alone made Rowan pause. Despite his previous disappointment, he couldn't ignore the temptation of such a reward. It could be the key to fixing his frail constitution. Dean Arthur assured him that Schwarin couldn't possibly know about his condition. This was just a scholarly contest. No danger, only words and skill. And so, Rowan agreed. When the day of the exchange finally arrived, The courtyard was alive with anticipation. A battalion of robed mages from Schwarin entered the Union grounds, their cloaks rippling in the wind. On the opposite side stood Rowan, his professors behind him. Dean Arthur welcomed the guests with the grace of an old diplomat. Then one of the foreign mages stepped forward, lowering his hood. "It's been a long time, Senior Arthur," he said with a smile. His name, surprisingly, was Bert. A name perhaps too plain for a powerful sorcerer, but his presence was anything but ordinary. Rowan said nothing. He simply studied the opponents across from him, older students, each radiating a powerful magical aura. These were no novices. They had come from the heart of the magical world, and their goal was clear: to test, challenge, and possibly surpass the Union's golden boy. And with that, the stage was set for a clash of intellects, one that would determine not only who was the better mage, but which academy would define the next age of magic. The Union Academy had made it clear from the start. They would send only one representative, and that would be Rowan. Schwarin, however, arrived with 3 of their older students. It was typical of them, always eager to show off and prove their superiority. But in a way, this setup worked in the Union's favor. It would give Rowan the chance to shine all the more brightly on his own. When Dean Arthur introduced Rowan as the Union's sole participant, Bert from Schwarin acted surprised. While the adults exchanged polite greetings, the competitors studied each other in silence. Rowan noticed one of the Schwarin students staring intensely at him. Feeling awkward, he smiled back, which immediately made the other boy look away. After a brief handshake, both sides prepared for the scholarly exchange scheduled later that afternoon. By the time the event began, the hall was packed with students eager to witness this battle of intellect. A few of Rowan's juniors worried that he might struggle against 3 opponents at once. Some of the girls even shouted cheers so loud that Lucas, sitting nearby, had to cover his ears. When he reminded them that this was just a debate, not a duel, they insisted that words could be just as dangerous. What if their beloved senior was hurt emotionally? Lucas could only stare in disbelief, realizing these girls actually knew who he was. Sophie sat beside him, amused, as the two waited for their friend to take the stage. Then, Professor Daphne stepped forward to open the event. She announced the beginning of the Magic Scholarship Exchange between the Union and Schwerin. The audience clapped, and a group of girls unfurled a banner with Rowan's name on it. A rather over-the-top gesture for what was supposed to be an academic debate. Finally, Rowan walked into the hall, calm and composed. The 3 Schwarin students followed soon after. Professor Daphne explained the rules. Each participant would take turns presenting a topic, writing out their spell formulas, and then discussing them in a question and answer session. The first challenger was Ali Marco of Schwarin, facing Rowan of the Union. Since Rowan was given the honor of choosing the opening topic, he selected one that felt meaningful to him: telekinesis. The reaction was immediate. The Schwarin students exchanged doubtful glances. Choosing such a simple, first-class spell for the opening round seemed ridiculous to them. Many assumed the rumors about Rowan's brilliance had been exaggerated. Dean Arthur and Director Lazarus, however, said nothing. They knew better. Ali Marco dismissed the choice, calling it unworthy of the event. But Rowan calmly countered that even the simplest spell could reveal profound truths if examined closely. Ali scoffed at the idea, calling it a waste of time, but Rowan pressed on. Wasn't the purpose of magic to seek understanding, no matter how small the detail? Cornered, Ali reluctantly agreed to debate the topic. Curious about his opponent's approach, Rowan politely asked what subject Ali had prepared. With a condescending smile, Ali announced he would be discussing the complexities of the fireball spell, teasing that it might be too advanced for someone of Rowan's age. Dean Arthur immediately suspected that Schwarin had chosen this on purpose, having heard of Rowan's remarkable fireball. But Rowan surprised everyone. He suggested they merge both topics into one discussion, telekinesis and fireball together. It would be far more enlightening, he said, to explore how 2 simple spells could interact in new ways. Without hesitation, he lifted a piece of chalk with telekinesis and began writing a complex formula on the board, all without uttering a single word. Ali, flustered, refused to be outdone. He too began writing with telekinesis, but he needed to chant continuously to maintain control. Meanwhile, the Schwarin professors watched Rowan's formula with growing confusion. Was he actually trying to create a new spell right there in front of them? When it was Ali's turn to explain, he confidently presented the standard versions of telekinesis and fireball. He claimed these ancient formulas were already perfected and not meant to be altered. Then Rowan stepped forward. He began by explaining that telekinesis, though simple, was often misunderstood. Most mages relied too much on power rather than precision. But inspired by Ali's fireball topic, he decided to take it a step further, to combine the 2 spells. On the board, his formula linked telekinetic control directly to the creation of fire. Then, with a quiet focus, he spun the chalk in midair and a spark burst forth. In that moment, The chalk transformed into a miniature, burning fireball, held entirely by Rowan's mind. He had just rewritten the laws of magic on the spot. The sworn mages stared, speechless. Everything they had been taught about magic seemed to crumble before their eyes. While the audience sat in stunned silence, Rowan continued calmly, explaining his theory and the deeper mechanics behind it. His lecture was so intricate that even the most senior scholars struggled to follow. Ali Marco, overwhelmed and unable to comprehend what he was hearing, realized he had made a grave mistake challenging this boy. When Rowan finished, he kindly asked Ali if he had any corrections or insights to add. He wasn't mocking him. He truly wanted to learn, but Ali couldn't say a word. He couldn't replicate the magic. He couldn't even understand it. The pressure crushed him until suddenly he coughed and collapsed, blood trickling from his nose. Rowan was startled. He hadn't meant for that to happen. Ali was rushed to the infirmary and the debate continued without him. Rowan went on to defeat the remaining Schwarren representatives just as easily, using nothing but logic, creativity, and mastery of magic. By the end of the day, he stood undefeated once again. Bert, the visiting mage, approached him with a proud smile, handing him the promised prize, a rare elixir, and thanking him for the unforgettable display. After the debate ended, Bert congratulated Rowan on his flawless victory and handed him the promised elixir. However, he advised the boy not to rush into drinking it. Consuming something that potent at too young an age could have side effects, he warned. It would be safer to wait until graduation. The crowd erupted in applause, but Rowan just smiled humbly. For him, it had never been about winning. It was about learning, exploring, and pushing the boundaries of what magic could be. The story shifted toward other familiar faces within the academy. Among them was a young woman named Rita, a third-year student, just like Rowan. For 3 long years, she had quietly harbored feelings for him. Everyone at the academy admired Rowan. He was brilliant, polite, and impossibly gifted. Students came from all over just to meet him, some even enrolling specifically because of his reputation. Rita knew all this, and she knew her chances were slim, but even so, she loved him from afar, cherishing the feeling in silence. On the final day of their 3rd year, she decided to take her chance. Gathering all her courage, she found Rowan and confessed her feelings. Her voice trembled, her heart pounded, but she spoke her truth. Unfortunately, Rowan's response was gentle yet unyielding. He apologized sincerely, explaining that love, to him, was a concept tied to loss, to someone who no longer existed in this world. His view of love was not one of joy or excitement, but of memory and grief. Then, with the calm logic of a scholar, he asked Rita to reflect on what she truly felt. Love, he explained, was complex and all-consuming, filled with passion, jealousy, fear, and longing. He didn't believe she felt all that toward him. Perhaps what she felt was admiration, not love. He wasn't dismissing her feelings. He simply wanted her to look inward and understand them more deeply. If, after reflection, she still believed it was love, he said he would gladly continue the conversation. That was how Rowan was. Always thoughtful, always honest, and always unintentionally devastating. Rita was left speechless, her heart aching yet strangely clear. She realized that while it hurt, she had no regrets. To confess her love was to free herself from it, and so her one-sided affection ended that day, leaving her with a quiet sense of peace. The scene opens in a classroom where the teacher announces that today's class will be joined by Director Lazaros, who will be giving a lecture about the Union and also explaining what the students should plan to do after graduation. Everyone claps as the lecture begins. Director Lazaros finishes the lecture and says that if anyone has any questions, they may ask. A student raises his hand and the director allows him to speak. The student asks why, even though so many students graduate every year, the Union is always short of people. The director explains that joining the Union brings great wealth and fame, but it also means giving up a peaceful life and personal happiness, something not everyone can handle. Another student then asks about the salary, benefits, and reputation of the Union. The director smiles and says there's no need to worry about that. They'll be paid enough to focus entirely on their missions. As for fame and authority, the Union is considered the sword and the book of the kingdom. That means the Union acts under direct authorization from His Majesty the King, granting its members the power to arrest even the 6 major families of the realm. Since the Union's actions represent the King's words, everyone is astonished. One of the students comments that it's truly amazing. But then our main character, Rowan, raises his hand and asks, "Sir, after joining the Union, can we continue to grow stronger, or will our magical potential stop there?" Rowan asks this because his teachers had advised him to focus only on magic, but despite that, he hasn't become as powerful as he hoped, and graduation is already near. The director replies, "I appreciate how far ahead you're thinking, Rowan. Yes, you can still grow stronger after joining the Union." Hearing that gives Rowan a huge sense of relief, and he makes a firm decision to devote himself fully to magic. To expand his magical capacity, Rowan begins studying an ancient book about elves, since his senior, Sena, once told him his mana capacity was similar to that of elves. The book describes how elves could process immense amounts of mana, but they didn't use magic directly. Instead, they summoned spirits to perform magic for them. If they wanted to use fire magic, they'd form a contract with a fire spirit, and they could do the same with other elemental spirits. However, the book also mentions that one night, the elves suddenly lost all their power. Rowan reads that during the era of the elves, the world tree and mystical beasts existed, and elves were divided into two types, dark elves and elder elves. Some lived in hiding while others ruled over lands, but when the world tree vanished from this world, the elves could no longer use spirit power. The world began to fracture into pieces, and as it broke apart, the elves couldn't survive, eventually becoming nothing more than a rare race. Rowan finds his story fascinating, but he still can't understand why he possesses such a large amount of mana. Suddenly, he notices a magic circle and goes to ask Arthur about it, particularly about dark magic, something like Voldemort's. Arthur looks at him curiously and asks why he wants to know about dark magic. Rowan explains that he couldn't find anything about it in the books. Arthur replies, "That's because no one uses dark magic anymore, but recently a group called the Graves has been using it. They become enemies of the Union." Rowan looks troubled and admits, "I only saw lethal spells in dark magic. I wanted to try them, but they're written in such an ancient language that I can't read them. I could only grasp one concept." Before Rowan can continue, Arthur interrupts and finishes his thought. "You mean the color of dark magic is different from normal mana, right?" Rowan's eyes widen and he nods in confirmation. Arthur says, "I can't see mana flow like you can, but there's a dark alliance and an organization called Ratel that use dark mana. That's why you've been seeing that murky color is dark mana." Rowan then asks, "So what exactly is dark mana?" Arthur explains, "Mana exists everywhere in this world, it's what created everything. But dark mana is what created the demon world." Rowan looks confused, so Arthur continues, "Have you heard of the demon world?" Rowan nods. Arthur says, "Then know this dark mana created the demon world. Every creature there uses dark mana, and the Graves are tapping into the demon world's power." Rowan says he's noticed traces of dark mana within some people too. Arthur explains that it's because of their dark emotions. Then Arthur asks, "Do you know what the Dark Alliance truly wants?" Rowan doesn't answer, and Arthur sighs. "They want to destroy this world. That's all you need to know." A few months later, we see Rowan standing by the window. Sophie shouts from behind, "You still haven't gotten a haircut? Your hair is getting too long." Rowan replies that he's fine, but then Lucas walks in and teases Sophie. The two start bickering, and when Lucas says, "Why are you staring at me?" Sophie pulls his ear and snaps, "I wasn't staring at you, you just happened to be standing next to me." Sophie then tells Rowan to get ready for the graduation ceremony. Watching the two of them argue, Rowan smiles warmly, realizing how close they've become. Time has flown by. He looks at the elixir he's supposed to drink on graduation day, and that day has finally come. But when he thinks about the ceremony, he remembers Lucas saying his family would definitely come, and Sophie saying the same about hers. That thought makes Rowan a little sad until he realizes that Sophie and Lucas are his family. Now his friends are his family and he'll protect them no matter what. He recalls his mother Pauline's words, "You're only alone when your heart is empty. Once you let someone into it, you'll never feel lonely again." Thinking of that, Rowan drinks the elixir. A surge of mana rushes through his body. He doesn't feel much physical change, but now his eyes can see the flow of mana more clearly than ever before. He picks up the mysterious stone, the one whose mana had never reacted before, and suddenly he can feel its energy. The patterns and circles on it begin to make sense to him. He realizes he might be able to break the circles and unlock the stone. He starts channeling his mana into it, and as soon as he does, the stone opens. Rowan is stunned by what he sees inside. From inside the rock, a leg first emerged. It looked like a bird's. Then came golden feathers, black wings, and finally it was revealed to be an owl. A strange kind of mana was being released from it. Rowan was shocked to see the owl and casually called it an ordinary one. The moment he said that, the owl started screeching loudly. Rowan quickly realized why and corrected himself, calling it a horned owl. Hearing that, the owl became happy and immediately hugged him. Rowan thought it was strange how affectionate this owl seemed toward humans, and since its murky mana had now disappeared, he decided it could be kept as a familiar. That's when he officially gave it a name, Owl. The scene shifts to the front gate of the Union Academy, where the graduation ceremony is in full swing. Deputy Director Oscar arrives, carrying graduation gifts. He still can't quite believe that his son, Lucas, has managed to graduate. As he stands there, his thoughts drift to Rowan after all. Oscar was the one who sent Rowan to the Union Academy in the first place, and he still feels a sense of responsibility toward him. Since Rowan didn't have a guardian at the academy, Oscar wanted to be the one to congratulate him personally. But before he could, he noticed some familiar faces among them was Sena. She was saying, I'm his counselor and I care about Rowan deeply. That's why I should be his guardian. He shared his heart with me, so I deserve to be the one. Arthur immediately cut in, saying, no, he promised me he'd help with my magic research after graduation, so I should be his guardian. The two began arguing, and then even the elf chimed in, saying, Rowan once called me his big sister, so I think I have a claim too. Hearing all this, Oscar couldn't help but smile in relief, realizing that he had been worrying for nothing. The scene then moves to the Union Academy auditorium. The teacher announces, let's welcome the representative of the 266th Union Academy class, the top graduate, Rowan. The crowd cheers as Rowan steps up to give his speech. He receives his graduation certificate and whispers spread through the audience. Where did he come from? Is he famous because of his looks? Rowan begins his speech saying, when I was 3 years old, I used to beg on the streets of downtown Orphan. When I got older, the Ratel organization tried to use me as a sacrifice, but the Union saved me, and I was brought here to the academy. When I started learning magic, I made a vow to protect those close to me and to restore peace. I've become the person I am today because of my guardians, my teachers, the dean, my friends, and everyone who stood by me throughout this journey. Today's speech is dedicated to all of you. Director Lazaros listens with pride and thinks to himself, Rowan, you never needed a guardian. That was a beautiful speech. After the ceremony, the scene shifts again. Rowan is seen with his friends. Right after graduation, he's already heading to take the Union entrance exam. Lucas looks at him, confused. Rowan explains, this was my plan from the beginning. Isn't that what you guys were thinking too? Lucas laughs and says, I just wanted to hide from my dad so he wouldn't scold me. Oh, and by the way, my dad's been looking for you. He said he wanted to talk. Rowan nods. All right, I'll talk to him. Just then, he notices Sophie looking sad. Lucas asks what's wrong, and Sophie quietly says, didn't you hear what people were saying during graduation? They were calling me an illegitimate child. It really hurt. Hearing that, Rowan comforts her gently. Don't worry, you're incredibly talented. I've seen your potential myself. Believe me, one day, you'll show the world exactly who you are. Sophie smiles a little, feeling comforted. Rowan then looks ahead and sees the massive Union entrance examination building. The three of them go inside to register. Rowan walks up and says, I'm Rowan. I'd like to register. The officials look surprised. He still looks so young, and his uniform makes it obvious he's just graduated. They whisper among themselves, wondering how someone so fresh out of school could already be applying to join the Union. One of them mutters, does he even know how to hold a sword? But then the registrar announces, Rowan, top graduate from the Union Academy, your registration is complete. Proceed to room number 1 for your entrance exam. The moment he says, top graduate, everyone's attitude changes completely. People start murmuring, that's what I'd expect from a top graduate. I heard he's quite handsome too. His name's Rowan, right? Wow, he really does look impressive. Rowan turns to Lucas and Sophie and asks, you guys done with your registration? They both nod. The next scene shows a waiting room for the entrance exam. Lucas explains, the first test will be a free demonstration. You'll need to show off your skills, prove what you can do. Rowan wishes both of them good luck and says, all right, see you after the exams. Then the supervisors call out, top graduate, step inside. The scene cuts to the testing arena. Rowan enters, and in front of him stands a massive golem with a red gem embedded in its chest. The supervisor says, begin. Rowan steps forward, raises his hand, and starts chanting his incantations. He doesn't want to reveal that he can perform chantless magic yet. But as he begins, the sheer intensity of mana flowing from his body shocks everyone in the room. His incantations are so varied and complex that the supervisors stand frozen in disbelief. Then the golem's body starts melting. Within moments, it collapses to the ground. Rowan uses his telekinesis to lift the red gem from the rubble and cracks it mid-air, instantly ending the golem. When the golem fell, the whole area filled with smoke, and in the middle of that smoke stood our MC. The supervisors couldn't understand what kind of magic he had just used. They thought he would use something like an ice spell or a fireball, but what they saw completely shocked them. Our MC stood there, emotionless, while outside, Lucas grabbed him by the shoulder, praising him for his incredible magic. Lucas congratulated him and said, you know why I'm even happier? Because look at those people's faces, the same ones who were talking trash about you just a while ago. Now, after seeing your magic power, they look completely demotivated. Then Lucas laughed proudly and added, but hey, it's still my turn, the great Lucas Sama. He patted Rowan on the back, making him wince in pain. Just then, Rowan noticed Sophie standing nearby, looking nervous and sad. Rowan walked over to her and said, you can do this. I know you can. We'll join the Union together with a smile. Hearing that, Sophie's face brightened up and she felt a wave of motivation. Then the examiner called her name. Sophie Phobel, it's your turn. Nervously, Sophie looked down at her sword, took a deep breath and stepped forward. Lucas encouraged her, saying, don't worry, you'll pass for sure. Just perform the way you practiced. Sophie smiled and headed into the exam room. Inside, she faced a massive golem. She took her stance, and one of the examiners above whispered, "Wait, is she using the Phobal family sword style? But her grip looks weak. I doubt she can pull it off properly." Another examiner asked, "Why do you think so?" The first one replied, "Because I once fought a member of the Phobal family. Their swordsmanship style is extremely heavy and difficult to control. She's an illegitimate child of that family, so I doubt she truly knows the technique." Rowan overheard them and thought, "Go on, Sophie, prove them wrong." Sophie then rushed toward the golem and unleashed a powerful slash in a single strike. 8 deep cuts appeared across the golem's body. The examiners were left speechless, completely stunned by what they just witnessed. Rowan stood smiling proudly as the golem fell apart and disappeared. Sophie stood there, breathing heavily but relieved. One of the examiners said nervously, "Sophie Phobal, you've passed. Please collect your passing stamp and move aside." Everyone in the room was still shocked, whispering among themselves, "How did she even attack so fast? Did you see it? Was fighting a golem always that easy?" Meanwhile, Rowan and Lucas were both overjoyed. Sophie ran up to them, calling their names happily. Lucas teased her, saying, "Your sword felt a little slow. Were you tired or something?" Sophie frowned, but Lucas laughed and said, "All right, let me show you how a real exam performance looks." The examiner called his name and Lucas walked in confidently, smiling. "Time to warm up a bit," he said. Before the examiner could even say begin, Lucas leaped high into the air and slashed down with his sword, landing a devastating strike that instantly shattered the golem's core. As he landed, he said casually, "Looks like I used a little too much power." The examiners were shocked once again. This was the third golem destroyed in a single day. One of them said, "Lucas, you've passed as well." The scene then shifted to a cozy home. Lucas had brought Rowan over and said, "Make yourself at home." Rowan thanked him and admitted, "I didn't even know where I'd go after graduating from the union school. Thanks for letting me stay." Lucas smiled and said, "It's my pleasure. Dinner's almost ready, come on." They were served carrot soup, but it didn't look tasty at all. Lucas's father told Rowan, "Eat as much as you want. If it's not enough, I'll bring more." Lucas, however, made a face and refused to eat. His father smacked him lightly with a spoon and said, "No whining at the dinner table. Eat what's in front of you." Rowan tried the soup but didn't like the taste. Then Lucas's father asked, "So, how did you like the gift I gave you?" Rowan smiled politely and said, "Of course I loved it," though he thought to himself that he'd already received 6 identical wallets before. Lucas's father laughed and said, "I never thought that the kid I left at the Union Academy would grow up to be such a great magician." Rowan smiled and replied, "Thank you. Please continue to look after me." A week later, we see the start of round 2 of the exams where our MC stands face to face with the next examiner. So, finally, we see how the MC went in front of the examiner. 2 examiners are talking about how the number of people passing the second exam this year is way higher than last year. They're calling this year a brilliant one, and among all the candidates, the most brilliant is a boy named Rowan. Another supervisor is watching him and says, "So, his name is Rowan." Meanwhile, Rowan is standing in the 3rd exam area thinking, "Well, it's good I don't have to fight Lucas or Sophie in this round, but who's going to be my opponent this time?" Just then, he notices an examiner standing in front of him. Seeing him, Rowan is shocked and says, "Sir, what are you doing here?" The examiner replies, "Do you know me?" Rowan remembers how this same examiner once commented on Sophie's grip and sword technique, calling it trace. Rowan smirks and says sarcastically, "I'm sure I'll get to learn a lot about grip and sword technique from you. I'm looking forward to it." The examiner doesn't quite get what he means, but then he smirks back and says, "I heard you just graduated. Well then, let me teach you a few lessons. You're lucky to be dueling with me." He releases his aura, pulls out his sword, and as soon as the supervisor says, "Begin," Rowan activates his mana. In an instant, he uses telekinesis to lift the examiner's sword into the air, making it fly right out of his hands. The examiner is completely shocked to see his sword ripped away like that. The supervisor asks, "Would you like to continue this duel?" The examiner replies confidently, "Of course." He clenches his fists, ready to fight barehanded, and rushes toward Rowan, thinking, "I'm a swordsman. Even without a sword, I can easily beat a brat like you." But the arrogant examiner gets a surprise. Rowan uses telekinesis again and drops the airborne sword right onto the examiner's head. It hits hard and the examiner collapses, unconscious. Rowan is declared the winner of that round. He smiles joyfully, proud of his victory. A few days later, we see him walking somewhere, holding the results of all his exams. Today was his interview day, the final step. Rowan was a bit nervous, but he had realized something from all the duels he'd fought so far. In every round, the pattern was the same. He never attacked first, he only defended and ended the fight quickly. It worked well for passing the exams, but he knew it wasn't making him stronger. So, if he joined the Union, he was determined to keep improving his strength. As he was lost in thought, his pet owl appeared. Rowan smiled, letting it perch on his shoulder and said, "So, did you come to celebrate my union admission too?" The owl hooted in its own language as if agreeing. But Rowan had noticed something strange about the owl. It could appear and disappear on its own, and whenever it vanished, he couldn't sense its mana anymore. It felt like it left this world completely. Rowan said, "Just stay with me a few more days, then we'll go to the union together." The owl seemed happy, but suddenly someone approached and the owl vanished instantly. That someone was Sophie. She said, "Come on, Rowan, it's time for the union interview." We see the union building where the interviews were already happening. There were quite a few candidates, all looking very nervous. Rowan looked around and noticed how few they were compared to previous years. Sophie corrected him, saying, "No, it's actually a lot. Last year the number was much smaller, but this year, because of you, there are 50 candidates." Then she looked at Lucas, who seemed really nervous, and asked, "Why do you look like that?" Rowan noticed his discomfort and said, "Maybe it's because the vice director, your father, is taking the interviews." Rowan teased, "You've been studying here for 2 years, right? And you're still this nervous?" Lucas grabbed his shoulder and said, "You're not helping me at all as a friend." Just then, a candidate walked out of the interview room looking devastated. Seeing that, everyone realized how tough the interview must be. Then, Rowan's name was called. He stood outside the door for a moment and noticed a magic circle on the gate. He understood that whoever entered would have their mana resonate with it. He wanted to examine it further, but it was time to go in. When he stepped inside, he was surprised. No one was there. He thought, "Wasn't the director supposed to be here? Where is he?" Suddenly, a telepathic voice spoke to him. "Come this way." He followed the voice and arrived at another door. When he opened it, a massive surge of mana flowed through the room, and standing before him was an elf who said softly, "Rowan, come in." The elf welcomes Rowan. Hearing her voice, Rowan immediately recognizes that this is the same voice he had been hearing inside his mind. Rowan can feel a very solid and high-quality mana coming from this elf, something he has never felt before. Seeing her, he thinks, "The position I aim to reach someday, it's standing right in front of me." The elf asks him to sit. Rowan sits down and she serves him tea. By looking at her, Rowan understands that she must be the governor of this union. Will I ever be able to reach her position? He wonders. Then Rowan takes a sip of the tea and he's shocked. Seeing his reaction, the elf asks, "Did you like the tea?" Rowan replies, "Yes. It's very hot, but after drinking it, I feel really refreshed." The elf answers, "Yes. That happened because your body's constitution is slightly different." Hearing this, Rowan becomes nervous and starts thinking, so she can even see the flow of mana in my body? That I can't store mana within myself? Seeing Rowan's reaction, the elf smiles slightly and says, "You've traveled a long road until now. You must have felt very alone." Hearing this, Rowan slips into his memories and thinks, "I never thought about this before. I remember when I came to the union for admission, that's when I finally made friends. But before that, there was always an emptiness in my heart. I just never noticed it." The elf continues, "You always felt lonely, but look, you still managed to come all the way here." Hearing her words, Rowan falls even deeper into his thoughts. "Since childhood until now, I've only been running after power. I was always in the dark, always struggling, but no one ever comforted me. No one ever said I did a good job." These words touch Rowan's heart deeply, and unconsciously, tears begin to fall from his eyes. Rowan is shocked to see his own tears. Is this happening because of the elf's mana? This has never happened before, he thinks. The elf looks at his tears and says, "Your body is still lacking, but your heart is very honest and very good. And not only that, you also have a loyal companion." Just then, the owl appears, visible to the elf. The owl bows his head toward her. Rowan is stunned because the owl had never appeared in front of anyone else before. Rowan tells her the owl's name, and hearing it, the elf smiles happily. "What a wonderful creature. I'll keep an eye on him, and now, you may go." But after talking with the elf, Rowan becomes deep in thought. She knows everything about me even though we've never met. Does that mean the future I saw in my visions? Can she tell me something about that too? He gathers himself and asks, "May I ask you a question?" The elf gives permission. Rowan asks, "The future I saw, is it actually going to come true?" The elf thinks for a moment and replies, "What you saw was only a glimpse of a possible future, and the future can be changed through actions. The future is in your hands. How you change it depends on you." Hearing this, Rowan finally feels relieved. "Ever since I saw that future, my mind felt foggy. I couldn't understand anything, but now I can see everything clearly. I can finally see which path I need to choose. And the person who showed him that path was his governor." Rowan thanks her sincerely and leaves. Then we are shown Oscar's house, where the three of them are preparing to officially enter the union as official members. Oscar has cooked a celebration meal for them. He made carrot soup with meat and a bunch of other ingredients, but Lucas doesn't like it at all and refuses to eat. Sophie then asks, "Is it possible that all three of us get placed in the same department?" Oscar replies, "We don't know what Her Excellency is planning. Out of the 10 candidates who passed, 3 are you. But remember this, I might be your uncle at home, even your father figure, but outside, I am the voice director. Be mindful of that." The 3 talk for a while. Lucas feels uneasy about joining the union. "I'll have to work under my father," he thinks. After getting ready, they leave. Outside the entrance of the Union B administration, their names are confirmed and they are asked to come inside. Before starting preliminary training, they are taken away for some preparations. As Rowan walks inside, he thinks, "I've come here before to meet Lazarus, but I never received so much respect. My status has really changed." Then they are taken into a smithy. As soon as the door opens, Lucas and Sophie feel a strong wave of heat. Inside, we see many blacksmiths working, swords lying everywhere. A union worker explains that before their union sword and book can be crafted, they must first choose their weapon. To help them, Mr. Alik and Mr. Kalik, dwarf blacksmiths, will assist them. We are shown Mr. Alik, who is also a dwarf. Alik tells them to choose whatever weapon they want, and he will forge it according to their choice. Lucas and Sophie begin selecting their weapons, but Rowan stands there, lost in thought. Alik watches him. Lucas chooses a claymore sword. Alik confidently asks him to swing it. Lucas steps forward and swings the sword. After watching, Alik says, "If we add a little more weight to this claymore, sharpen the edge more, and adjust its tip, it will suit you well, and will adjust its size according to your age." Lucas becomes happy. Then Alik asks Sophie to swing the longsword she is holding. Sophie uses her phobal swordsmanship. Alik observes her and says, "Your swordsmanship is good. Your strength is low, but your balance is excellent. You've trained your lower back well, but if you use a shield along with your sword, you'll perform even better." Hearing this, Sophie becomes nervous and asks, "Will you make a shield for me too?" Alik immediately agrees, but then Sophie hesitates. "Do I really have to use a shield?" Alik doesn't answer her yet. Instead, he turns to Rowan. "Hey, the quiet boy standing there." He looks at him for a while and says, "I heard you're a mage." Rowan replies, "Yes, I am." Alik says, "All right, I'll make a suitable weapon for you, something that suits your abilities." But Rowan interrupts him. "Wait, I want something else. I have a piece of a sword that I've been using with my telekinesis to fight anyone, but it's broken. Can you recover it?" Alik looks at the shard and says, "This is a fragment of a demonic sword. It has dark mana infused in it. Interesting. But it cannot be repaired. However, if you want, I can break it down and forge 12 blades from it. You can use those." Rowan becomes excited. But Alik stops him. "Calm down. This is a unique sword. If I break it, each piece must contain an equal amount of mana. Someone will have to infuse mana into every piece, and a normal mage isn't enough for this. We need a level 4 mage, or one we hire. If we don't, the fragment could be destroyed." Hearing this, Rowan is shocked. "You only need a level 4 mage?" Alik is surprised. Then Rowan says, "If that's the case, I can do it myself." Alik becomes thoughtful. He's saying this with so much confidence. Even a union mage wouldn't say such a thing so confidently. Is this boy really that powerful? Or is he just overconfident? Well, let's see. He tells Rowan, "Boy, this isn't easy, but try it. Just be careful. Don't break it." Our Rowan begins infusing his mana into the fragment, slowly feeling its presence. He starts observing the mana lines spreading through the fragment, and then he recalls the lessons his mom Pauline taught him, along with the direct explanation Lazarus once gave him about mana paths. With that, Rowan finally understands how to infuse enough mana into this piece. He guides his mana carefully, watching the lines where the fragment should be split so the mana will divide equally. He focuses and eventually, he becomes ready to break the fragment into even smaller parts. Watching all of this, the dwarves are completely shocked. They can't believe that this 15-year-old kid is actually a 4th-class magician. And then Rowan breaks the sword fragment into 12 equal pieces and drops them into the dwarves' hands. Seeing this, they become even more stunned, because every single piece contains an equal division of mana. They still can't believe a 15-year-old did this. Motivated, they say that they'll give their absolute best. The scene shifts to Lazarus, who is telling everyone that they've all received their uniforms and weapons, and from now on, their preliminary training begins. As they know, the Union is divided into 7 divisions: Creed, Harmony, Honor, Stability, Utility, Duty, and Liberty. They will be placed into one of these divisions where they'll be completing missions. Their starting rank will be Oz, and based on their achievements, skills, and merit, their rank will change to Runner, Seeker, Expert, and lastly, Master. He says that during this journey, they'll face many difficulties. People will call them the Kingdom's dogs, and there may even be attempts on their lives. But even then, they must not give up, because their only goal is civilian protection and maintaining peace in this world. This is the oath they've taken. And now, it's time to assign the new recruits to their divisions. Rowan then goes back to the blacksmith. where the dwarf returns the 12 fragments wrapped in a small pouch and tells him to name it Shevel. On the other hand, Lucas is feeling really down because he was also assigned to the Creed division, where the direct supervisor happens to be his own father. Because of this, he's extremely upset, and Rowan tells him to relax. Then both of them go to the Creed division, where their seniors are already training. Suddenly, someone walks in and says that the recruits he had been waiting for have finally arrived. Then we see a man. Rowan looks at his badge, and it turns out to be an expert rank badge. The person is Adrian, the leader of the Creed division. Rowan is shocked to see his rank. Adrian introduces himself, greeting everyone, and in response, Rowan and Lucas bow slightly and introduce themselves as well. The moment Adrian hears Rowan's name, he becomes genuinely excited. He says he's been bored for a long time, but now that Rowan is here, things will finally get interesting. He says, "All right, Rowan, show me whatever skills you've got." Rowan hesitates a bit, thinking that they want to see his skills the moment he arrived. But then Adrian tells him that his opponent will be this person. Lucas looks shocked as soon as he sees who it is. The opponent turns out to be none other than Oscar, the vice leader of the Creed division. Both of them stand face to face. Oscar says that 5 years ago, he saw Rowan using telekinesis to spin a sword fragment. So now he's excited to see just how powerful Rowan has become. Rowan replies that he's excited too, and he wants to see how much he has grown. Oscar draws his sword and says that mere words aren't enough to fight him, he needs power. So show me. Rowan replies that even though he's a magician, he now has 12 blades as well, and he takes them out. Oscar becomes even more excited, saying he had only seen one blade earlier, but now there are 12. Rowan explains that they were given to him as a gift. Oscar instantly understands and says that Alik must have made them. He asks if Alik gave them a name. Rowan says yes, he named them Shevel. Oscar explains that Shevel means a blade that always protects its master, but he doubts they'll be able to protect Rowan. Rowan responds that he wants to find out exactly what they're capable of. He makes one request whether he can make the first move. Hearing this, Lucas and Adrian are both surprised. But Oscar realizes that Rowan must have a plan and has prepared something. Then Oscar releases his aura and says that if Rowan tries to imitate someone else's technique, it will be unforgivable. Feeling Oscar's aura, Rowan begins talking about the Claymore swordsmanship technique of the Passau family. He says he learned everything about this technique while training with Lucas, but standing before Sir Oscar and feeling the true aura of this swordsmanship is truly overwhelming. Then he says, "All right, let's begin." Rowan immediately launches an attack with his blades, but Oscar deflects all of them with a single slash of his claymore. He says the technique has incredible destructive power, and with a bit more practice, Rowan will master it completely. Then Oscar rushes forward to attack Rowan. Rowan is shocked by his speed and strength, and Oscar says, "For now, you're nowhere near matching my strength." The deputy director of the Creed division was swinging his claymore with crushing force. Rowan quickly realized that with the speed and power gap between them, he could not face that blade head on. So instead of clashing directly, Rowan tried to slow him down. Using his shovel, he wrapped mana threads around Oscar's body, trying to restrain him. To Adrian, it looked as if some invisible force had suddenly grabbed hold of the weapon. But Oscar continued to move his claymore regardless. Rowan grew anxious. He had manipulated weight, friction, and surface tension to lock Oscar in place, yet nothing was working. On the other side, Oscar noticed the new trick and said that while Rowan had learned something interesting, it would not be enough to stop him. Oscar leapt forward again, attacking Rowan with his claymore. Rowan barely managed to block the strike with his civil blade, completely locking Oscar's sword in place. Even so, his shovel trembled violently, but it held. Seeing this, Oscar was genuinely impressed. A fierce battle erupted between the two. As Rowan retreated, he thought to himself that his mana pool was too weak to fully restrain someone of Oscar's level. Worse, he had no space left behind him to retreat any further. So he made a decision. If he could not retreat and could not fully control his opponent, then he would have to break through. Rowan cast Fireball at point-blank range. Oscar was shocked. It was an incredibly close attack, but he still managed to reflect it with his claymore. Everyone watching was stunned. Rowan immediately apologized, realizing that the flames had burned half of Oscar's mustache. The scene shifted to laughter and applause as comrades teased the deputy director about his new half-stash. Rowan stood there, embarrassed, forcing himself to think sad thoughts so he would not smile too much. Despite the teasing, the Oz cadets were clearly impressed. They commented that the rookie Oz kid was not bad at all, rough in real combat, but undeniably talented, just as the rumors had said. Adrian then called Rowan over. He told him that his maneuver, slowing the blade and redirecting it, was very interesting, and that both his magic and swordsmanship stood out. When asked about Oscar's swordsmanship, Rowan answered honestly. Each strike carried overwhelming power within a graceful flow. He felt rushed and unsatisfied with his own responses, but he had clearly learned something by facing such refined technique. The commander praised him. The Creed division valued adaptability, and Rowan's ability to analyze, adjust, and survive in an uneven fight suited their style perfectly. He told Rowan not to rush. Even if Rowan was not yet where he wanted to be, he was well prepared for what lay ahead, giving credit to a mentor named Diego for training him so well. Another officer, Sienna, was instructed to help Rowan grow even further. With that, Rowan was dismissed. Next came Lucas's turn. For his duel, Adrian chose Lucas's own father, Oscar, as the opponent. Lucas was terrified and begged to be spared as the scene shifted into personal training. Before training began, Sienna bluntly told Rowan that while his magic was excellent, his close combat ability was very weak. If Rowan failed to maintain distance, he would struggle to gain the upper hand. Giving up space the way he did in his duel was dangerous, especially when facing someone with a much higher power level. Rowan agreed internally. Once forced into close range, his low mana reserves and limited physical technique made him extremely vulnerable. Sienna decided to demonstrate. She told Rowan to watch carefully, explaining that footwork was the key to controlling distance and tempo. Then she moved. Her footwork was astonishingly light. She maintained her breath and speed while gliding across the field, her movement against the mana flow looking completely natural. Even though it was only a mock spar, her positional control reflected the instincts of someone who had survived countless real battles. Rowan realized that this kind of movement could not be mastered in a single day. Sienna told him again not to rush. Until he mastered the basics of footwork and distance, trying to imitate advanced techniques would only make him unstable. But Rowan had already begun thinking. He replayed Oscar's movements in his mind. The wide arcs of the massive claymore, the precise distance control, even the angle of his toes determining life or death during a thrust. This kind of analysis was nothing new to him. What made the difference was mana and how ranged magic could be used to limit an opponent's options. In a fair battle between mages, mana reserves often decided the outcome. Unfortunately, Rowan's mana was still stuck at the level he had as a child. Now that he was part of the Union, he had to assume every opponent would surpass him in raw power. Simply copying seniors like Oscar or Sienna had limited value when their base abilities were so different. Sienna noticed that something had clicked for him. Rowan admitted that what he had just seen was not something he could simply perform in his current state. She pointed out that he had copied the movement on his first try, yet now claimed he could go no further. If that was his definition of giving up, then perhaps she had misjudged him. She reminded him that Rowan was a mage who had already overcome time itself, someone who had created entirely new magic that no one else could use. Rowan finally understood. Instead of blaming his lack of power, he needed to create his own spell. What if, instead of copying someone else's footwork, he controlled the flow of air in advance to enable the movement he wanted? What if he went beyond supporting himself and instead prevented enemies from ever entering his space? The idea began to take shape. An invisible barrier that reshaped the battlefield itself. Not a solid wall, but a zone where air and mana were manipulated so precisely that opponents were subtly pushed away, slowed down, or redirected before they could even get close. After his realization, Rowan begins experimenting with the idea of an invisible wall, one that keeps enemies out before they can even swing. He uses Professor Arthur's Azura Barrier foundation for his new spell. In other words, he is creating his own domain. As blue mana spreads outward, a barrier is formed. He practices by replaying Oscar's previous duel in his mind, neutralizing Oscar's attacks while improving the efficiency of his counters. Over time, it starts to feel less like a shield and more like a personal domain. Rowan adjusts speed and friction around imaginary blades, observing how even small changes dull the weight of a swing or pull its edge off course. With every repetition, he begins to see the invisible lines of attack and how his interference bends them, turning raw aggression into something predictable and easy to evade. Sienna has been watching all of this. Suddenly, she breaks through the barrier and counters Rowan's shovel. The clash of swords fills the air with smoke and sparks. Sienna comments that Rowan has discovered a very interesting method. The air around them now feels unusually heavy and dense. As always, Rowan deflects the praise, claiming it is all thanks to his senior's teaching. With a snort at his smooth talk, Sienna decides to test the technique up close. The lesson, clearly, is not over yet. They step into Rowan's altered air together. Sienna feels her breath catch for just a moment. Rowan points out that her first step was slightly off. Then they clash again and again, swords ringing as Rowan focuses only on what he still lacks, insisting that he is far from catching up. Sienna corrects him gently. She says that insight comes from recognizing flaws, and true understanding follows after that. Judging by Rowan's breathing and speed, she tells him he is being far too harsh on himself. When Rowan asks to be taught just one more thing, her answer is calm and certain. Of course. The scene shifts to the commander's room. Sienna knocks and Adrian tells her to come in. The commander and vice commander praise Rowan, saying that he has overcome many of the typical weaknesses of a mage and that Sienna has taught him well. Sienna remains modest, insisting she did nothing special. They agree that Sienna is highly compatible with Rowan's growth and that, to match his rising reputation and save face, Rowan needs more than training, he needs real missions. A new assignment is issued. Rowan will accompany his senior on a reconnaissance mission. Sienna is shocked, but Adrian describes it as light work. Nothing grand. Still, its purpose is serious. They are to investigate new movements after the vice commander previously wiped out Ratel Farm's operations. Rumors say Ratel's remnants have started a new business, gathering mercenaries in Orphan, mainly to provide protection for other mages. The scene shifts to Sophie. She speaks sadly, mentioning that today is the day of Rowan's mission. We learn that Sophie has been placed alone into the 4th unit and assigned to the Honor Guard, a combat group made up largely of mages and magic swordsmen. Sophie struggles with a weapon she is not yet used to. Lucas teases her, saying she cannot even handle one weapon and yet she is thinking about missions. During their conversation, Rowan suggests that she ask her senior for help. Sophie responds sarcastically, asking if they would really help her. Rowan answers honestly that they help him. Sophie confirms this. Lucas grumbles that seniors always call him a cocky brat whenever he spars with them. To him, Rowan seems completely unaware of how gently others treat him. Sophie hesitates to ask the senior members of the Honor Guard for guidance. Instead, before leaving on her mission, she shyly asks Rowan if he can look over her swordsmanship just once. Rowan agrees. He suggests it would be even better if Lucas joined the spar, though Lucas protests that he is only confident in fighting, not in giving advice. The duel begins. Both Sophie and Lucas give it their all, swords and shields clashing again and again. Rowan carefully watches how Sophie raises her shield, remembering Uncle Arlick, who had crafted such shields not just for defense, but for offense as well. Rowan points out that lowering her stance slightly and refining how she channels mana through her weapon would make her movements quicker and more stable. Just then, Sienna arrives and calls for Rowan and Lucas. Lucas rushes toward her, shouting her name. Before leaving, Rowan hands Sophie carefully written notes. She thanks him, clearly touched, saying he did not need to go that far. Rowan simply smiles and reminds her that they are friends, promising to help even more when he returns. Rowan heads out with a bright farewell. Sophie tells everyone to take care as they depart for their respective missions. The scene shifts to the city of Orphan. Rowan and Lucas arrive alongside Sienna. As Lucas climbs down, he nearly stumbles, having believed that horseback riding was just sitting. Sienna immediately snaps at him, ordering him to practice properly when they return. Dead weight has no place on missions. Lucas quickly answers, "Yes, ma'am." Sienna then reminds them of their cover. They are not Union members here, just local mercenaries familiar with the area. Her tone hardens as she repeats the mission rules. This is covert reconnaissance, not open combat. She warns them again to be careful how they address her in public. Orphan itself is complicated. Once an important transport hub in the Grafton Kingdom, the city was politically neglected. Over time, waves of immigrants from many lands gathered outside its walls, turning the outskirts into a sprawling, crime-ridden zone. To keep that crime at a distance, the city officially labeled those outskirts an immigrant zone and sealed them off behind high walls. For years, the authorities ignored what happened inside, until the danger threatened to spill back into Orphan itself and could no longer be overlooked. Now the situation is desperate. That lawless zone has been overrun by ghouls, likely created by Ratel. Orphan is openly unfriendly toward the Union, so Rowan's group must enter as hired mercenaries, gathering information before the corruption spreads too far. Lucas asks whether ghouls can be turned back into human. Sienna answers bluntly that they cannot. The only way to deal with them is to kill them. Hearing this, Lucas replies with a simple, "Yes, big sis." Sienna freezes and asks why he is calling her that. Lucas says it feels better than calling her ma'am. She blushes slightly, then sighs and allows it. Inside the city, the mercenary district is nothing like the orderly halls of the Union. Mana density and pollution shift wildly from street to street. The crowd is made up of many races, their faces rough and hardened. This is a place shaped by survival, not discipline. Rowan, Lucas, and their leader step forward to register for a ghoul subjugation team. They present their mercenary papers, initially listing 3 members, then casually adding a 4th as Rowan joins. They are told to bring back ghoul tongs as proof, with heads priced by the kill. No one questions Rowan's age or fragile appearance, much to his quiet relief. Still, his heart pounds as he wonders who they will be teamed with, forcing himself to see it as a learning opportunity. Their future teammates, however, see things very differently. From across the room, rough mercenaries glance at Rowan once and dismiss him as a brat barely out of the tower. To them, he looks too thin and too delicate. At best, they assume he has only mastered basic magic. They grumble that he will take up space, slow them down, and cut into their share of their reward. In the end, they accept him only because the numbers work out. One mutters darkly that they should pretend he does not exist. Maybe he will be kind enough to die early and free them of the burden. Rowan feels the hostility and chooses not to respond. Sticking too close to people like this would only exhaust him, dragging him into their pace and their resentment. "Follow me, rookie." They bark, pushing into the outer edge of the quarantine zone. Vendors shout about fresh fruit and rooms for rent, and despite its dangerous designation, the outer ring looks almost like a normal market. Because it is closest to the city, this sector sees heavy foot traffic and remains relatively safe. Rowan notes that they are unlikely to encounter Ratel directly here, which suits his purpose. As the group moves, Rowan begins to fade without truly disappearing. He subtly manipulates the air, gathering disturbances and dulling nearby senses, allowing himself to drift away from his unpleasant companions and blend naturally into the crowd. Going alone will make reconnaissance easier. He sighs inwardly at the mercenaries' rudeness, but pushes his irritation aside. The mission matters more than his pride. Then, amid the noise of the market, he feels it. A familiar presence brushes against his senses. Sienna's mana, gentle but alert like a distant hand resting on his shoulder. He realizes she is watching him, quietly ensuring his safety. Her earlier warning echoes in his mind. Inside the quarantine zone, ghouls created by Ratel are rampant, and even on an information mission, caution is everything. Rowan understands. This is their first real mission, and the seniors are worried. With Sienna watching over him, he feels both reassured and determined. He steels himself, unwilling to disappoint her, resolved to do this properly. His first objective is clear. Find traces of ghouls. He moves deeper into the zone, his steps light, his mind reviewing everything he has learned. Ghouls are humanoid monsters created from living humans, twisted by necromancers, dark priests, or black mages. They possess unnatural strength, long razor-sharp claws, and teeth and tongues that coil like serpents. Their hunger is for human flesh. Until now, Rowan has only read about them. He has never seen a real ghoul, leaving their true danger suspended between imagination and dread. As he presses forward, the atmosphere changes. The inner quarantine zone feels heavier, darker, as though the air itself is saturated with neglect and despair. People lie drunk and unconscious in alleys, their bodies abandoned where they fell. It feels like a place where someone could die or vanish and no one would question it, let alone raise an alarm. And Rowan understands why Ratel chose this place. To them, these forgotten people are perfect materials, bodies no one will miss, lives that can be harvested for ghoul experiments without protest. Memories surface unbidden. The shelter, human trees and fruit, people sacrificed in twisted rituals. Here in Olin's quarantine zone, ghouls serve the same role. Human suffering turned into monstrous existence. Rowan's chest tightens. He cannot allow this cycle to continue. He cannot stand by while lives are twisted into tools, then discarded in silence. For peace, and for the lives of ordinary people, this must be stopped. Not just here, not just now, everywhere. Rowan has already moved far from the end entrance when he spots it. A creature darts through the shadows, moving with that unnatural speed that immediately marks it as a product of dark magic. Before Rowan can react, he hears a voice and recognizes it instantly. It is Lucas. With his claymore raised, Lucas leaps forward and cleaves into the ghoul. The noise makes Rowan tense. He wonders if Lucas has forgotten their cover entirely. Why is he standing there so openly? Why is he making such a scene? But the real reason Lucas stops is much simpler. His back aches from fighting non-stop for too long. The remaining ghouls see Lucas and freeze in terror. To them, he looks like a nightmare made flesh. Without hesitation, they turn and flee. Rowan immediately understands this as an opportunity and gives chase. Ghouls may be monsters, but they can still feel fear. From their perspective, Lucas must look like a walking disaster, a human storm tearing their allies apart. If they are running, it is likely to call for reinforcements. Rowan keeps chasing, but the distance between them keeps growing. His mana reserves and physical speed simply cannot keep up with a dark magic creature running at full power. It hits him then. Chasing a ghoul without a proper movement technique may have been a serious mistake. Just before the creature disappears completely, Rowan changes tactics. He lashes out with his shovel, striking the ghoul's legs and drawing blood. The creature escapes, but now it leaves a clear trail behind. Rowan follows the bloodstains through the streets. As he runs, regret tightens his chest. If he had known things would turn out like this, he would have learned a proper movement spell from Mr. Diego beforehand. Ignoring that weakness now feels painfully short-sighted. He thinks about what a movement technique suited for the Order of Conviction should be. Not flashy, not explosive. It should be quiet, swift, and built for pursuit and reconnaissance. Unlike Blake's overwhelming burst-style movement, this order favors something closer to Sienna's approach, subtle, fluid, and nearly impossible to track. Rowan realizes then that being paired with Senior Sienna on this mission was no coincidence. The captain likely wanted him to observe the Order of Conviction's traits firsthand and gently push him toward the movement art he will need for hunting and information gathering. From the first moment he saw Sienna move, her footwork felt elusive, like water slipping through fingers or wind curling around obstacles. Her movement has no clear beginning or end, making it impossible to predict, and because of that, it feels completely free. Rather than launching herself forward with concentrated mana bursts, she steps onto diffused mana and glides along it, using a sliding movement technique. Rowan's mana cannot compare to hers yet, but he can sense it. There is already enough mana flowing through the space around him to ride. For now, However, he forces his focus back to the present. The blood trail leads him to a ghoul hideout. Several ghouls surround the area, and inside, he sees humans bound and held captive. Before it is too late, Rowan tells himself he has to save them. He charges in, his shovel flashing. Blood sprays through the air as he cuts down the ghouls, but they do not stay down. Their bodies regenerate, and one by one they rise again, rushing toward him. This time, Rowan expands his domain. The moment the ghouls enter it, their movements slow dramatically. One ghoul is burned alive by fire magic, another is frozen solid, its body unable to regenerate. Seeing this, the mercenaries nearby freeze in fear. Rowan advances calmly, thinking to himself, my domain does more than slow them down. It works like an isolated mana laboratory. He makes a decision. Might as well try that spell now. A devastating heat wave erupts. In an instant, every ghoul in the area is completely vaporized. Rowan's shovel returns to his side and Robin speaks. He reminds Rowan that he told him earlier, cut out their tongues. People who talk too much are annoying. He says this while looking at the bound humans. The captives panic immediately. They shout that they are humans, not ghouls. They ask if Rowan does not recognize them. They were supposed to team up with him. They came looking for him, but when they could not find him, the ghouls captured them instead. Hearing this, Met clicks his tongue. He says they clearly do not know when to use their mouths and when to keep them shut. The mercenaries tremble in fear as Met casually cuts their restraints and asks how they were captured in the first place. They look strong enough to handle ghouls. Their leader explains that if it had only been ghouls, they would have won, but there was a dark priest controlling them. The moment Rowan hears the words, dark priest, his expression darkens. He asks where the priest went. The mercenaries answer that he headed toward the hill. After saying that, they quickly leave. Rowan considers going after him alone, but before he can move, Sienna arrives. She tells him he did well. Rowan thanks her, but she immediately adds that they will not go alone. If a dark priest is involved, there will be many ghouls nearby. She says the two of them will go together. Rowan asks about Lucas. Sienna replies that Lucas is already causing enough destruction elsewhere. He is drawing attention, and that is fine. With that, she activates her movement technique and glides forward. Watching closely, Rowan thinks to himself that this might be his chance. If he observes Senior Sienna's movement carefully enough, maybe this time he can finally learn it. With that determination, he follows after her. The time had come to fight the Dark Priest. Sienna moved toward the ghouls, using her footwork with flawless precision. Rowan realized that Sienna was also using mana. It just wasn't visible, because she wasn't moving against the flow of mana. Instead of resisting it, she was placing her feet directly on the circulation of mana itself. Rowan tried to do the same, but his legs almost gave out. Still, he accepted the truth. In the Faith Corps, this footwork was ranked second, so for a newbie like him, progressing slowly wasn't surprising at all. But Rowan couldn't afford to fall behind. He reduced the recoil and friction in his steps and lightly placed his feet on the mana circulation, just like Senior Sienna. Then he dashed forward in a straight line and instantly reached her side. Seeing him, Sienna looked genuinely impressed and asked if he had understood her concept while he was behind her. Rowan replied that he finally understood he shouldn't have gone against mana. Sienna pressed him further, but Rowan said this was only possible because of her. This time, he asked for permission to handle the Dark Priest himself. In front of them stood the Dark Priest and his army of ghouls. The Dark Priest was also staring directly at Rowan. At that moment, Rowan started slaughtering the ghouls with his shovel, but something felt strange. Rowan explained that mutated ghouls usually had their own intelligence. When they fought Lucas, the ghouls had chosen to flee after seeing his terrifying face, but these ghouls weren't running away. Instead, they were growing even more mad. Was this happening because the Dark Priest was present? Just then, a ghoul appeared behind Rowan and swung its fist at him. Before it could land the attack, Sienna appeared from behind and cut the ghoul into 2 pieces. When Rowan noticed this, he was left stunned. Sienna had been watching his mistake closely. Rowan immediately ran to the other side, thinking that if he made even one more mistake, his senior's life could be in danger. He quickly formed a mana barrier and started burning all the ghouls trapped inside it with fireballs. The ghouls screamed as they were reduced to ashes. Rowan then tried to move toward the Dark Priest. On the other side, the Dark Priest activated his power. The moment Sienna felt that spell, she tried to warn Rowan, but it was already too late. Rowan saw the Dark Priest transform himself into a ghoul. The pitch-black mana radiating from him felt exactly like the Dark Priest Rowan had seen in his vision. The Dark Priest stood up and began preparing an attack. Rowan understood what was coming and struck first with his shovel, but the blade bounced off the Dark Priest's body. Rowan was shocked. His shovel couldn't even penetrate it. The body was incredibly hard and fast. The Dark Priest charged straight toward Rowan to attack, but Rowan didn't panic. He still had his domain. The moment the Dark Priest entered it, his speed drastically slowed. Rowan was about to bombard him with continuous fireballs when Sienna suddenly rushed in from behind and charged at the Dark Priest herself. Rowan tried to stop her, thinking the Dark Priest's body was so tough that even Sienna's sword wouldn't be able to cut it. But his judgment turned out to be completely wrong. Sienna leaped into the air with her sword and cleanly severed the ghoul's head. She then landed, standing on its severed body. Rowan was left in complete shock. It was the first time he had ever seen an aura sword. He thought the opponent was extremely tough, yet his senior had defeated it effortlessly. Sienna then said that the Dark Priest must have left a trail and they should follow it. Rowan and Sienna began following that trail. Along the way, they saw countless corpses scattered across the path. The sight was horrifying for Rowan. Then Sienna told him to stop. They had reached the household of the dark group Ratel. At that moment, Ratel's household came into view. Standing outside the stronghold, Rowan asks if this is Ratel's main base. Sienna replies that no, this is just one of their many branches. The two of them head inside, and the moment they enter, a strong stench of blood fills the air. Sienna immediately realizes that this must be where Ratel's people experimented on humans. Just then, she notices a magic circle carved into one of the walls. Seeing it, Rowan wonders if it's a magic circle and thinks that if they could decode it, they might be able to pass through the wall. But before he can even finish his thought, Sienna delivers a powerful kick and completely shatters the wall. Rowan flinches. Seeing his reaction, Sienna asks what's wrong. Rowan says she shouldn't have broken it with her foot, that it might hurt her. Sienna tells him to stop talking nonsense, and they both move inside through the large opening. Inside, they find a huge library filled with unknown spells, ancient artifacts, and one leather-bound book that immediately draws Rowan's attention. He lifts the book using mana and wonders if it might have been made from human skin. As he flips through the pages, he discovers a spell whose magic circle looks almost identical to the one carved into the rock from which the owl had emerged. Sienna notices his reaction and asks what's wrong. Rowan explains that the book contains multiple variations of a single spell. Sienna asks if this is a spell used to create the ghouls. Rowan replies that it's not. This spell is used to summon or awaken something. At that moment, Rowan understands that this same spell was used by the Dark Priest to awaken a demon within himself. He then summons the owl and it appears immediately, addressing him as master in its own language. Rowan asks the most important question on his mind, whether the owl is a demon. The owl doesn't seem to understand. Seeing the owl, Sienna nervously asks who or what it actually is. Rowan explains that when he was a child, he found a stone, and this owl emerged from it. Hearing this, Sienna is surprised. Rowan adds that the stone also had the exact same magic circle engraved on it as the one shown in the book, which made him believe there must be some kind of connection between them. Rowan continues examining the spells in the book. They are filled with murky mana and the language is ancient. He feels that if he were to try using one of these spells, he could end up unleashing something extremely dangerous. Just then, Sienna tells Rowan that they should leave this place for now and report everything to the governor of All City. She explains that there could be many more Ratel branches hidden inside the quarantine zone, and to eliminate them, they would need a full team. The scene shifts to Lucas, who has just killed his 30th ghoul with his longsword. At that moment, Rowan and Sienna arrive and call out to him. Lucas immediately runs over. Sienna tells him that the investigation is complete and that it went smoothly, all thanks to him for keeping the ghouls occupied. Lucas is thrilled and asks if the investigation is really over already. Rowan tells him they're heading to All City and that Lucas should come with them. As they walk, Lucas asks how many ghouls Rowan killed. He says that even killing 5 would be a big deal and he himself killed 30. Rowan calmly replies that he killed 50 ghouls and 1 dark priest. He then pulls a severed head out of his bag. Lucas is shocked and asks what that is. Rowan explains that it's the dark priest's head and that he also cut off the ears of the ghouls he killed as proof in case the guild needs it. Lucas immediately says that if Rowan takes those into the city, people will faint just from seeing them. Rowan realizes Lucas is right. Sienna then warns Rowan that since they're entering the city, he should keep all the ears properly stored inside his bag. Rowan does exactly that. They arrive outside City Hall, where guards stop them and ask what they're doing there. The guards recognize them and ask if they're mercenaries. Sienna answers yes and says they need to go inside to meet the mayor. The guards laugh after looking at their empty hands and mock them, saying they couldn't even catch a ghoul, let alone meet the mayor and tell them to leave. Sienna angrily removes her robe and warns them one last time to let them meet the mayor. Seeing the scene in front of them, the guards are stunned. Both Sienna and Rowan are now standing in full uniform. Sienna reveals that they belong to the Union. The scene shifts to inside the mansion, where the Dark Priest's severed head is placed on a table. Seeing it, a servant is terrified and says he will immediately go fetch the mayor. After he leaves, the room falls silent. No one speaks to Rowan. Sienna is writing something with a pen, but there's no ink. Rowan realizes it's a magical tool. He wants to talk to her, but Sienna sits down and begins meditating. Rowan then decides to summon the owl to ask it some questions. The owl appears and Rowan starts asking questions. He asks if the owl is a demon, if it knows Ratel, and if it knows anything about the magic circle they saw in the book. To every question, the owl responds with a no. Not knowing the answers makes it nervous. Rowan gently pats the owl and tells it that he's not disappointed. Hearing this, the owl becomes happy and then, in its own language, tells Rowan that it has a skill. Rowan is excited and says that it really has such a skill. But then the owl shares more information in its language, and hearing it, Rowan is completely shocked. The owl explains that if Rowan wants to use that skill, he will have to eat the ghoul's head. Hearing this, Rowan is completely shocked. He asks the owl again to confirm it. The owl makes a cute face and keeps requesting to eat it, but Rowan hesitates, thinking he can't do this without permission. Sienna, who has been sitting there and listening to everything, tells him to feed the head to the owl. Rowan hesitates and asks what about her achievement. Sienna replies that she doesn't need any achievement. Rowan then signals to the owl. The owl opens its beak to eat the head, but then its mouth stretches unnaturally wide, and in a single bite, it completely devours the head. Seeing this, Lucas is terrified and asks what that thing even is. Rowan explains that this is the same creature that came out of the stone Lucas gifted him, and that the stone had the same magic circle carved on it as the one they found in Ratel's hideout. Lucas is shocked and asks if that means it's dangerous. Rowan reassures him that it isn't. Lucas then asks why they fed it the head. Rowan replies that the owl told him that if it eats it, one of its skills will activate, a skill that can reveal anyone's secrets. After eating the head, the owl even grows noticeably fatter. Lucas, confused, asks if it can really do something like that. Rowan answers that he isn't completely sure yet. Just then, guards enter the room. Seeing them, Rowan comments that this is the perfect chance to test it. At that moment, someone speaks up, saying that if he had known they were here, he would have come immediately. It's none other than the mayor himself. Nervously, he introduces himself, saying his name is Bruce. As he steps closer, he says he heard they had gone into the quarantine zone before coming here and asks if everything is all right. Then he notices the fat owl and is shocked, asking what such a chubby owl is doing here. Suddenly, the owl hops over and lands on the mayor's head. The guards rush forward to protect him, but Rowan warns everyone by drawing his shovel, telling them not to take a single step forward. Lucas also steps in, placing his sword near the mayor's neck, and says that Rowan isn't joking. At that point, the mayor starts revealing his secrets. He admits that if he had more time, he would have personally wiped out all the people living in the slums. Sienna asks if he just stood by and let Ratel create ghouls. The mayor replies, yes. His plan was to eliminate the criminals in the slums. The dark priest would create ghouls, and he would send mercenaries to kill them. Sienna finds this strange and asks what Ratel would even gain from doing something like this. The mayor reveals that this was one of Ratel's experiments. Using mercenaries, they wanted to create the strongest possible version of a ghoul. He says that if he had just a little more time, all the criminals in the slums would have been eliminated and the dark priest would have created the most powerful ghoul of all. Sienna asks if all of this was his doing. The mayor answers no, saying it was the order of their goddess, Priestess Amy. Hearing that name, Rowan is completely shocked. At that moment, the owl hops off the mayor's head. The mayor looks confused, wondering what just happened. Sienna points her sword at him and says she heard everything, how he worked together with Ratel and allowed experiments on the people of the slums. The mayor is still in denial. Sienna continues, saying that he betrayed the people of Orphan and the entire kingdom by siding with a dark organization. Because of that, Sienna removes him from his position as mayor, shuts down the city hall, and executes him on the spot. The mayor is stunned. In the very next moment, Sienna cuts off his head. Just as she declared, City Hall is shut down and all of its personnel are restrained. Everyone is interrogated, but no new information comes out. However, one thing is confirmed. The mayor's confession was completely true. Sienna closes her diary and says that after some rest, they need to return to the quarantine zone. Rowan then asks about the pen again. Sienna explains that it's a transmission pen. Once Rowan becomes a runner, he'll receive one as well. Anything written with it is delivered directly to the Union. Rowan is now completely certain that it's a magical tool. They all begin heading back toward the quarantine zone. Meanwhile, Lucas is still troubled, wondering who this priestess Amy really is, the name the mayor hesitated to speak until his final moments. Rowan remains silent. Seeing his reaction, Sienna grows concerned and asks what's wrong, why he's being so quiet. Rowan replies that when he was at the Dungland Center, there was also a girl named Amy who used to teach him. He wonders if that Amy could be the same goddess Amy. Hearing this, Sienna warns Rowan not to forget the Union's rules. Once you join the Union, you must leave behind the grudges and attachments of your past life. Rowan understands what she means. Rowan then asks another question. He asks if Sienna already knew that there was a Ratel base here. Sienna replies that no. First, the Union sends a runner to investigate any place that seems suspicious. If the runner finds something, they send a report to the Union using the magic pen. After that, Union personnel are dispatched to handle everything. She reminds Rowan that the same thing happened to him. When he was at the Dungland Center, Union runners were sent there first, and only after that was he rescued. Rowan remembers how the Ratel organization first turned humans into dead trees and then converted them into ghouls. He feels regret, realizing how he almost forgot his mission. Remotivating himself, he silently makes a vow and heads toward the gate of the quarantine zone. At the gate, Sienna arrives and announces to the guards that the mayor of Orphan had colluded with the Ratel organization and was executed for it. From now on, This place will be managed by the Union. Anyone who raises their voice against this decision will be treated as an accomplice of Ratel. She orders the quarantine zone gates to be opened. The gates open and people begin coming out. A guard, shocked, says that there could still be ghouls inside and asks how they're supposed to handle that. Sienna asks him whether he's a guard or a member of Ratel. The guard replies that he's a guard and protecting this place is his duty. Sienna answers that then he should do his duty. If he sees any ghoul, he is to kill it. People keep pouring out of the quarantine zone and Sienna watches it all. Suddenly, she hears something and says that they arrived faster than expected. Rowan asks if it's Ratel. Sienna replies that they wouldn't have the courage to attack. At that moment, they see the Union's commander of the Honor Council, Megda, arriving on horseback, accompanied by Adrian and other Union members. Adrian says that they must have been waiting for them for quite some time. Sienna submits her report and replies that if they had informed her earlier, she would have prepared for their arrival. She adds that she can't believe even Commander Megda of the Honor Guard has come personally. Adrian responds that the moment they received her report, they immediately set out for this place, and that's why Miss Megda came along with them. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come. Both Lucas and Rowan feel nervous upon seeing them and bow respectfully. Then Rowan looks up at Commander Megda and freezes in shock. He quickly bows again and introduces himself, saying it's an honor to meet her. Megda looks at him and says that so he's the famous Rowan. She adds that she didn't come here to meet him, but for Ratel's magic book. Rowan immediately uses his mana manipulation to summon the magic book to his side. Seeing his excellent mana control, Megda is shocked and says that she should have spoken to the governor earlier about this boy. Hearing that, Rowan blushes slightly. Megda then looks at the massive wall and asks if it's a problem. She says they should handle this first. She dismount from her horse and start walking forward, with Adrian following her. They tell everyone else to step back. The two of them stand in front of the wall. Adrian draws his sword and together they say that they should show something flashy. Megda begins floating in the air and activates an enormous magic circle in the sky, one so vast that it envelops the entire city. Everyone present is left in complete shock. Watching the destructive power contained within that massive magic circle, Rowan says in awe that these must be Commander Megda's magical powers. He calls it truly incredible.